Welcome back. What you're about to hear aren't just stories, they're memories, echoing through the fog of war. Before we begin, like the video, subscribe and tell me where are you from and what time are you watching. Now, get comfortable. The rain is already falling, and the stories are on their way. Warrant Officer Michael Reese, 21, 1st Cavalry Division, 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion, Detroit, Michigan. The Huey's rotor wash flattened the elephant grass as we descended into the LZ, the turbine whine drowning out everything except the hammering of enemy fire. Red tracers streaked past my windscreen, close enough that I could feel their heat in my imagination. The door gunners returned fire, their M60s chattering death in 6-second bursts. Spent brass rained onto the skids and disappeared into the vortex below. Hot LZ! Hot LZ! My co-pilot shouted unnecessarily. I could see the muzzle flashes myself, blinking like deadly fireflies from the tree line. I held the collective steady, fighting the instinct to jerk us back to safety. 20 feet below, soldiers of the 2-7 Cavalry waited for extraction, pinned down and desperate. They needed me steady. They needed me now. 30 seconds, I called over the intercom. Make 'em count. The humidity hit me first. Every morning, a physical presence that coated my skin before my feet even touched the floor. This morning was no different. I wiped sleep from my eyes and tasted the metallic tang of unfiltered water from my canteen. The pilot's hooch smelled of mildew, mosquito repellent, and the lingering staleness of cigarettes. Home such. As it was, my flight suit clung uncomfortably as I dressed, already damp from the morning air. Outside, the helipad at Camp Evans hummed with pre-mission activity. Crew chiefs performed walkarounds, door gunners checked their weapons, and pilots clustered around the operations tent for briefings. The rising sun turned the eastern sky a bloody orange through the omnipresent haze of dust and smoke that defined Vietnam's atmosphere. "Morning, Reese," called Wilson, my crew chief. He was already checking our ship, a battle-scarred UH-1D Huey we'd named Valkyrie. His hands moved with practiced precision over critical components, looking for anything that might kill us, faster than the enemy could. "What's the word?" I asked, running my own hands over the helicopter's skin in a ritual that was part inspection, part superstition. Pilots who didn't develop superstitions in Vietnam didn't last long. "Brigade says we're running extraction for a company from 2-7. They hit something big near the A-Shao and need immediate evac." Wilson didn't look up as he spoke, focused on securing an ammunition can to the door gunner's mount. My co-pilot, Jenkins, approached with maps in the mission brief. His face showed the tight expression common to men who had seen too much, too young. 5 birds, staggered insertion. We're chalk 3. Weather's marginal. Early morning fog in the valley, clearing by 0800. I nodded, studying the map coordinates. The A-Shao Valley had a reputation, the kind that made experienced pilots check their life insurance. Wedged against the Laotian border, it served as a major infiltration route for the North Vietnamese Army. The valley floor offered a dozen perfect ambush sites, and the surrounding hills provided excellent positions for anti-aircraft weapons. "Whose lead?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "Taylor," Jenkins replied. Captain Taylor was solid, 3 tours in country, and seemingly immune to fear. If anyone could lead us into the A-Shao and back out again, it was him. The mission briefing was concise. The 2-7 Cavalry had been conducting a reconnaissance and force operation when they encountered a large NVA unit. After a night of heavy fighting, they were running low on ammunition and had too many wounded to move effectively on foot. Our job was simple on paper: get in, load up, get out. In practice, it would be anything but simple. "Gunships will work the area 2 minutes before we arrive," the operations officer explained, pointing to the map. "Insertion will be west to east with extraction in the same order. Expected ground time is 90 seconds per bird." 90 seconds. In combat terms, an eternity. In aviation terms, barely enough time to land, load, and lift off. We finished. Pre-flight checks as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. The air smelled of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the sweet sour scent of jungle vegetation. I settled into the pilot's seat, feeling the familiar contours that had shaped themselves to my body over hundreds of flight hours. The helicopter, for all its mechanical complexity, felt like an extension of myself, its vibrations, sounds, and responses as familiar as my own heartbeat. "Valkyrie is up and ready," Wilson reported through the intercom as the turbine spooled to life. The distinctive whop-whop-whop of Huey blades cutting air, a sound that would forever define this war, built from a whisper to a roar. Our flight of 5 lifted off in sequence, settling into a loose trail formation as we climbed to altitude. Below us, the landscape transitioned from the organized chaos of Camp Evans to the patchwork green of rice paddies, then to the unbroken emerald canopy of triple-layer jungle. The A Shao lay 30 minutes ahead, hidden in morning mist that glowed golden in the early light. "Beautiful country," Jenkins commented through the intercom. "Shame about the war." It was a standard joke among pilots, but he wasn't wrong. From the air, Vietnam was breathtaking. Rugged mountains, verdant valleys, rivers that wound like silver ribbons through the landscape. It was easy to forget, from altitude, that death waited below. As we approached the valley, the tranquility dissolved. Radio traffic intensified, gunships reporting enemy positions, ground forces confirming extraction coordinates, command elements adjusting plans in real time. The calm of routine flying gave way to the focused tension of combat operations. "Gunships, engaging now," reported Taylor from the lead helicopter. "Confirm visual on smoke southeast quadrant of LZ. I spotted it immediately." Purple smoke curling upward through the canopy, marking the position of our troops below. Around it, the distinctive flashes and smoke puffs of an ongoing firefight. The NVA hadn't broken contact, which meant our landing zone would be hot. My mouth went dry, the taste of fear familiar and coppery. My flight suit, already damp with humidity, now clung with cold sweat. Yet my hands remained steady on the controls, muscle memory taking over where courage might falter. "Chalk 1, commencing approach," Taylor announced. His Huey banked sharply, descending toward the smoke marker in a maneuver we called falling. Leave on an unpredictable pattern designed to confuse enemy gunners. Through my windscreen, I watched his approach. Tracer fire immediately rose to meet him, red lines reaching upward like the fingers of angry gods. The door gunners responded, their M60s hammering. The helicopter disappeared briefly in the canopy, then reappeared seconds later, climbing rapidly with a full load of soldiers visible through the open doors. "Chalk 1 clear. Multiple wounded aboard. Heavy fire from northeast tree line." "Chalk 2, inbound," came the next call. The second helicopter repeated the process, taking fire but emerging intact with another load of troops. "Chalk 3, you're up," Taylor directed. "My turn." I banked Valkyrie hard, feeling her respond to control inputs with the sensitivity of a living thing. The descent was steep, nearly vertical at times, to minimize our exposure to ground fire. The G-forces pushed me back into my seat as we plummeted from 1,000 feet to 50 in seconds. The world contracted to immediate sensations. The vibration of the airframe, the sweat stinging my eyes, the smell of hydraulic fluid and gunpowder, the metallic taste of adrenaline. Time simultaneously slowed and accelerated, each second packed with more sensory information than the human brain was designed to process. The tree line filled my windscreen, then gave way to a small clearing, where desperate men waited. I flared the helicopter hard, bleeding off speed, feeling rather than seeing the proximity of the ground through the seat of my flight suit. The skids touched earth with a gentleness that belied our urgent circumstances. "Go, go, go," Wilson shouted to the waiting soldiers who needed no encouragement. They sprinted for the helicopter, carrying wounded between them, their faces masks of exhaustion and relief. Through the open doors came the smell of battle, cordite, blood, sweat, and the vegetative decay of the jungle floor. The sounds were a cacophony: gunfire, shouted orders, the screams of wounded men, and above it all, the unyielding whine of our turbine at full power. "Taking fire left," Jenkins called. Through his side window, muzzle flashes pulsed from the dense undergrowth. At the clearing's edge, Our door gunner responded immediately, his M60 chattering death toward the threat. Brass casings cascaded into the cabin, hot enough to burn exposed skin. The acrid smell of gun smoke filled the aircraft, mixing with the metallic scent of blood from the wounded now being loaded aboard. 30 seconds, I called, maintaining a white-knuckle grip on the controls. The helicopter settled slightly as more weight came aboard. Wounded men, equipment, the souls I was responsible for lifting to safety. A bullet pinged off the airframe somewhere behind me, the distinctive sound of metal striking metal that every pilot dreaded. Another round shattered a small section of windscreen, sending fragments across the instrument panel. Heavy fire. Multiple shooters, Wilson reported, now firing his own weapon through the open door. Full load. Go, 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 came the call I'd been waiting for. I didn't need to be told twice. I pulled collective, feeling the helicopter's skids break contact with the earth. The turbine screamed as I demanded maximum power, the torquemeter edging into the red zone. For a heart-stopping moment, we hung suspended, neither fully airborne nor earthbound. The most vulnerable moment of any hot extraction. Then Valkyrie responded, clawing for altitude, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as we escaped. The ground effect. I kept the nose down, trading altitude for speed, wanting horizontal separation from the threat as much as vertical. The smell inside the cabin changed. Blood, fear, jungle rot, unwashed bodies. Behind me, Wilson and the door gunner were rendering first aid to the wounded, their movements practiced despite the bucking, weaving flight path I maintained to avoid ground fire. 3 wounded, 1 critical, Wilson reported. Head wound, needs immediate dust-off to the MASH. I nodded, already adjusting our course directly for the field hospital rather than the primary landing zone. Chalk 3, diverting to medical with priority casualties, I reported to Taylor. We'll rejoin after drop-off. Roger that, Chalk. 3, good hunting. As we cleared the valley, the immediate danger faded. The gunfire fell away behind us, replaced by the steady rhythm of the rotors and the moans of wounded men. The smells remained, blood soaking through field dressings, the distinctive sweet copper scent of severe trauma, the sharp tang of urine from a soldier whose wounds had cost him control of bodily functions. I maintained focus on flying, but my awareness expanded to include the human cargo we carried. Young men, most barely out of high school, bearing wounds that would forever mark them, inside and out. Through the intercom, I could hear Wilson talking constantly to the soldier with the head wound, keeping him engaged, keeping him alive through the sheer force of human connection. Stay with me, buddy. We're 5 minutes out. Best doctors in Vietnam waiting for you. Think about that girl you showed me in your wallet. She's waiting too. Stay with me. The field hospital appeared ahead, a collection of tents and prefabricated structures with a large red cross that was visible from the air. I called in our approach, receiving immediate clearance to land at the trauma pad. Medical personnel were already rushing out, preparing to receive the wounded we carried. The landing was smoother than the extraction had been. No enemy fire to complicate things. As soon as the skids touched down, the medical team swarmed. The helicopter. They worked with brutal efficiency, transferring the wounded to stretchers and rushing them toward the operating theater. The most critical case, the head wound, went first, surrounded by running medical staff performing procedures even as they moved. I kept the turbine running, rotors turning at flight idle. This wasn't our final destination. As soon as our wounded were clear, we'd return to the operation, extracting more troops from the valley, continuing until everyone was out or we couldn't fly anymore. Wilson appeared at my window. Head wounds in surgery. Others are stable. We're clear to go. I nodded, already bringing the turbine back to full power. The smell of blood remained in the cabin, along with discarded bandages and spent medical packaging that Wilson quickly cleared away. The door gunner was reloading his M60, face set in grim determination. Back to the A Shao? Jenkins asked, though he already knew the answer. Back to the A Shao, I confirmed, lifting the helicopter into the humid air. Once more, we rejoined the extraction operation for 3 more runs into the valley. Each insertion featured its own unique symphony of sensations, different patterns of enemy fire, different smells of jungle and fear, different faces of the men we saved. By the third run, my flight suit was completely soaked with sweat. My eyes burning from salt and strain, my arms aching from fighting the controls through evasive maneuvers. On our final extraction, we took the company commander and his radio operator, the last men out. As we lifted away from the landing zone for the final time, I watched NVA soldiers emerge from the tree line, occupying the ground we'd just left. So close. Always so close. That's everyone, Taylor confirmed over the radio. 2-7 is officially out of the Ashao. Good work, people. The flight back to base was quieter. The immediate tension of combat had passed, leaving the hollow aftermath that all soldiers know. Not quite relief, not quite sadness, something in between that had no proper name. The cabin still smelled of blood and battle, but now joined by cigarette smoke as several passengers lit up, hands visibly shaking as delayed reaction set in. "Hey, pilot," called a voice from behind me. I half turned to see a sergeant, his uniform caked with mud and dried blood, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. "Thanks for coming to get us." The simple statement carried more weight than any formal commendation. I nodded acknowledgement, words unnecessary between men who understood what had transpired. We landed at Camp Evans as afternoon heat reached its peak. The air on the tarmac shimmered with temperature and humidity, creating mirages that danced across the helipad. The smell of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and hot metal enveloped us as I shut down the turbine. As the rotor blades slowed, the sounds of the base returned. Generators humming, distant artillery, the constant background noise of machinery and men at war. Wilson approached as I completed post-flight checks, his uniform stained with other men's blood. "Head wound made it through surgery. Doc says he might even keep his eyesight. It was as close to good news as we got in this war." I nodded, continuing my inspection of Valkyrie's battle damage. 3 bullet holes through non-critical areas, easily patchable before tomorrow's missions. "Beer at the O Club later?" Jenkins asked as we walked away from the helicopter. "Yeah," I agreed, though what I really wanted was a shower and 12 hours of unconsciousness. The sensory overload of combat flying, the sounds, smells, tastes, and feelings needed to be processed, stored away, compartmentalized. Beer helped with that sometimes. In my hooch, I stripped off the sweat-soaked flight suit, feeling the blessed relief of air on skin. The canvas walls trapped heat like an oven, but compared to the cockpit of a Huey after 4 combat extractions, it felt cool enough. I closed my eyes and immediately saw tracers rising toward me, smelled blood and fear, felt the helicopter bucking beneath my hands. 4 missions today, probably 4 tomorrow, and the day after that, until my tour ended or something else ended it for me. I showered in lukewarm water that never quite washed away the feeling of Vietnam, a country that clung to you through all your senses, that worked its way inside you until you couldn't remember feeling, smelling, tasting, hearing, or seeing anything else. The sensory signatures of combat imprinted themselves like instinct, the sound that meant incoming rockets, the smell that indicated an ambush ahead, the taste of air before a monsoon hit. That night at the officers' club, amid the ritualized, drinking and gallows humor that kept men sane in insane circumstances, someone asked me how many lives I'd saved that day. I hadn't counted. Couldn't count. In the moment, they weren't lives. They were weight calculations, balance considerations, fuel consumption factors. Only afterward did they become men again with faces and futures. "Enough," I answered finally, the taste of cheap beer bitter on my tongue. Enough for today. Tomorrow would bring more missions, more sensations, more moments of terror and skill and luck. The constant whine of turbines, the smell of hydraulic fluid, the taste of fear, the feel of controls responding to commands, the sight of men running toward my helicopter with death at their heels. For now, though, in the artificial bubble of the officers' club, with its smell of beer and cigarettes and the sound of forced laughter, I allowed myself to exist solely in the present moment. Tomorrow's sensory assaults would come soon enough. Mike Donovan, Staff Sergeant, 25th Infantry Division. Tropic Lightning, 22, Bakersfield, California. The beam of my flashlight caught something metal in the darkness. My heart stopped. In the narrow confines of the Viet Cong tunnel, barely wide enough for my shoulders, there was no room to maneuver. The air was thick, hot, filled with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something human. I held my breath, sweat rolling down my face despite the relative coolness underground. My free hand tightened around the grip of my .45, the only companion I trusted down here. The metal object remained still. I inched forward. They called us tunnel rats. It wasn't a formal military designation or anything you'd find in the training manuals back at Fort Benning. It was a nickname born from necessity. The Viet Cong had built thousands of miles of tunnels throughout the country, particularly in the Cu Chi district near Saigon, where our division was operating. These weren't just hiding spots. They were underground cities with hospitals, sleeping quarters, storage facilities, and command centers, and someone had to go down there and clear them out. That someone was me. I arrived in country with the 25th Infantry Division in January 1967, a fresh-faced private first class from California who'd never been further east than Arizona. Within 6 months, I'd made specialist, and by early '68, I was a sergeant. Not because I was some kind of military genius, but because the casualty rate ensured rapid promotion, especially for tunnel rats. Our battalion had been sweeping through an area about 20 clicks northwest of Saigon. We'd encountered sporadic resistance over the past 3 days, a few sniper rounds, some harassing fire from positions that were abandoned by the time we got there. Typical VC tactics. Then one of our point men discovered a tunnel entrance hidden beneath a clump of bamboo. Captain Reynolds called me to the front. "Donovan, looks like you've got work to do." I nodded, already removing my rucksack and web gear. "Yes, sir." My squad leader, Staff Sergeant Willis, handed me my tunnel kit. A flashlight, knife, .45 pistol, and a few grenades. "Don't be a hero down there, Donovan," he said, as he always did. "You hit something you can't handle, you back out and we'll call in some CS gas or blow the entrance? Roger that, Sergeant." But we both knew that wasn't how it worked. In the tunnels, you either solved the problem yourself, or you didn't come. Back I stripped down to my t-shirt, fatigue pants, and boots. The less you carried, the better. Even the smallest tunnel could feel claustrophobic with full gear. I took a deep breath, clicked on my flashlight, and slid headfirst into the hole. The entrance was tight, maybe 2 feet in diameter. I squirmed through about 10 feet of this before it opened up slightly into a passage where I could crouch. The air was noticeably cooler but thick with humidity. The smell hit me immediately: earth, mold, human waste, and the faint metallic scent that might have been blood. "I'm in," I called back, my voice sounding strange in the confined space. "First chamber clear." Moving deeper. This was always the worst part. That first commitment to go deeper, to leave the entrance and safety behind. Each tunnel system was different. Some were simple straight shots with maybe 1 or 2 chambers. Others were complex labyrinths designed to trap and kill unwary Americans. You never knew which you were entering until you were already inside. I followed the main passage as it sloped downward at about a 15-degree angle. The VC were smart. They built their tunnels with sudden turns to prevent American forces from simply shooting down the length of them or dropping grenades. I moved slowly, methodically, checking each turn before proceeding. After about 50 meters, I came to a side chamber. Following protocol, I tossed a pebble in first, a trick I'd learned to see if anyone was waiting to ambush me. Nothing moved. I swung my flashlight beam around the small room. It was a sleeping area with several bamboo mats laid out on the ground and a few personal items scattered about. A comb, some cigarettes, a worn photo of a woman. "Sleeping quarters," I reported back through the comms wire that trailed behind me. "Recently used." I continued onward. The tunnel network grew more complex, with passages branching off in multiple directions. I marked each junction with chalk, to ensure I could find my way back. At one junction, I heard something, a faint scraping sound. I froze, clicking off my flashlight. In the perfect darkness, I listened. The sound came again, from the left passage. It could have been an animal. Rats were common in these tunnels, but I couldn't take that chance. I pulled the pin on a CS gas grenade, rolled it down the left passage, then quickly backed up around the corner. There was a soft pop, then the unmistakable sound of coughing and gagging. Someone was down here with me. Contact, I whispered into my comm wire. One or more VC in the eastern passage. Deployed CS. Roger, came Willis's tinny voice. Need backup? Negative. Continuing reconnaissance. I waited for a full 5 minutes, listening to the diminishing sounds of distress. The CS gas would make that passage uninhabitable for a while. I could check it later, but for now, I needed to clear the rest of the complex. The main tunnel continued to slope downward. This was unusual. Most VC tunnels stayed within 20 feet of the surface due to the high water table in many areas. The fact that this one went deeper suggested it might be a major complex. After another 100 meters, the tunnel widened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam revealed a sight that made my stomach clench, a fully equipped medical area. There were several bamboo platforms that served as operating tables, shelves stocked with medicine and bandages, and, most disturbing, a collection of surgical instruments laid out on a cloth. I found a medical facility, I reported. Looks operational, recently used. Copy that, Willis replied. Any intel materials? Checking now. I moved carefully around the perimeter of the room, examining shelves and containers. On a small table near one of the operating platforms was a stack of papers, medical records from what I could tell with my limited Vietnamese. I stuffed them into the waterproof pouch I carried for such findings. As I turned to continue my exploration, my flashlight beam caught something moving at the far end of the chamber. I dropped to a crouch, 45 in hand. Who's there? I called in Vietnamese, one of the few phrases I'd bothered to learn. No response. I edged forward, keeping my weapon trained on the spot. As I got closer, I could see it was a curtain moving slightly in some unfelt draft. Behind it was another passage. I twitched the curtain aside with the barrel of my pistol and peered through. This passage was different, reinforced with bamboo and wooden supports. It led to what appeared to be a larger chamber about 10 meters ahead. I reported the new finding and proceeded with extreme caution. The reinforced section suggested I was approaching something important. Command center? Munition storage? Either way, it would be guarded. The passage opened into a chamber about 15 feet square, huge by tunnel standards. My flashlight beam revealed a table with maps spread across it, a radio set up in the corner, and several wooden chairs. A VC command post, and it wasn't empty. My light caught the startled faces of 3 Vietnamese men in the black pajamas of the Viet Cong. One was clearly an officer, with a pistol holstered at his side. The other 2 appeared to be radio operators or clerks. For a split second, we all froze in mutual surprise. Then everything happened at once. The officer reached for his pistol. I fired twice, the .45's report deafening in the confined space. He crumpled. One of the others lunged toward me with something in his hand, a knife or grenade, I couldn't tell. I shot him center mass. The third man dove for cover behind the table, upending it. Contact! Contact! I yelled into my comm wire. 3 VC in a command post. 2 down, 1 taking cover. I couldn't hear any response over the ringing in my ears from the gunshots. The confined space amplified everything, and the muzzle flash had momentarily destroyed my night vision. I backed up against the wall of the chamber, blinking furiously, trying to regain my bearings. A shape moved in the darkness, the third man making a break for another exit I hadn't noticed. I fired twice more, heard a grunt, but couldn't tell if I'd hit him. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the chamber, mixing with the copper scent of blood. Need backup, I called into the wire. Possible runner heading deeper into the complex. I waited, listening intently. No movement, No sound except my own ragged breathing. After 30 seconds, I risked turning my flashlight back on, sweeping the beam across the chamber. The officer and one VC lay where they'd fallen. There was a blood trail leading to the other exit, but no sign of the third man. I approached cautiously, checking the bodies to ensure they weren't playing possum. Both were dead. The maps on the overturned table caught my attention. Even in my agitated state, I recognized their intelligence value. I gathered them up, along with a code book I found near the radio, and stuffed them into my pouch. The second exit led to another tunnel heading even deeper. I was about to follow when my comm wire crackled to life. "Donovan, report status." It was Captain Reynolds himself. "Sir, I've neutralized 2 VC in what appears to be a command post. Third is wounded and has retreated deeper into the complex. I've secured maps and a code book." "Outstanding. Are you injured?" "Negative, sir." "Hold position. We're sending Tyler in to back you up." Tyler was our other tunnel rat, a wiry kid from Tennessee with nerves of steel. I was glad for the backup. "Roger that. Holding position." While waiting, I examined the command post more thoroughly. The radio equipment was more sophisticated than what we typically found in VC tunnels. The maps showed detailed layouts of American base positions around Saigon, including guard rotations and vulnerabilities. This wasn't just any tunnel. Complex. It was a major intelligence and command center. I heard movement in the main tunnel and raised my pistol. "Donovan?" Tyler's voice called out. "In here," I responded, lowering my weapon. Tyler crawled into the chamber, whistling softly when he saw the bodies and equipment. "Jackpot, huh? Major intel site," I confirmed. "There's at least one more VC down here wounded, plus whatever that eastern passage holds where I deployed CS. Captain wants us to follow standard procedure. Clear the immediate area, tag anything of intelligence value, then pull back and let the engineers collapse it." I nodded. "Let's clear that last tunnel first. Wounded VC could still be dangerous." We proceeded down the tunnel where the third man had disappeared. About 30 meters in, it opened into another small chamber, empty except for some communications equipment and a blood-soaked mat. The blood trail continued through yet another exit. "He's still moving," Tyler observed. "We should follow," I said. Captain didn't want any survivors reporting what we found. Tyler nodded, and we continued the pursuit. The tunnel began to angle upward now, suggesting we might be approaching another exit. The blood trail was becoming more intermittent. Either the VC was bleeding less, or he was intentionally trying to hide his path. After another 50 meters, we could see light ahead. Faint, but definite. An exit. "He's heading for the surface," I whispered. We proceeded with extreme caution. If the wounded VC had friends waiting outside, we'd be extremely vulnerable emerging from the tunnel. The exit was concealed beneath a thatched hut about half a kilometer from where we'd entered. Tyler and I peered cautiously through the opening. The hut appeared empty, but we could hear voices outside. Vietnamese voices, multiple speakers. I keyed my comm wire. "Captain, we've followed the tunnel to another exit. Half click, northeast of entry point. Multiple VC voices outside." "Roger that," Reynolds replied. "Stay put. We're moving to your position." Tyler and I settled in to wait, weapons trained on the hut's doorway. The voices outside continued, sometimes rising in what sounded like argument. "Think they know we're here?" Tyler whispered. "Wounded guy probably told them," I replied. "Question is whether they're planning to flush us out or just collapse the tunnel with us in it." That cheerful thought hung between us as we waited for our platoon to arrive. 20 minutes later, we heard gunfire outside. American M16s. The firefight was brief, but intense. Then silence. "Donovan? Tyler? You still down there?" It was Sergeant Willis. "Affirmative," I called back. "All clear to exit?" "All clear. 4 VC KIA out here, including one with a gut wound. Looks like your handiwork." We emerged from the tunnel into the late afternoon sunlight, blinking, like moles. The brightness was almost painful after hours underground. Our platoon had secured the area. and several men were already examining the bodies of the VC. Captain Reynolds approached, his face grim but satisfied. "Good work down there. Intelligence is already salivating over those maps you found." I nodded, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline drained from my system. "There's more down there, sir. That whole complex is a major command center. Engineers are setting charges now. That complex won't exist in another hour." I handed over my pouch of intelligence materials, then moved to a nearby stream to wash the tunnel grime from my face and hands. The cool water was shocking after the stifling heat of the tunnels. Tyler dropped down beside me, splashing water on his own dirt-streaked face. "You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly. "What's that?" "Tomorrow we'll do it all again. Different tunnel, same shit." I couldn't argue with that. In the 9 months I'd been in Vietnam, I'd cleared more tunnels than I could count, each one potentially my last. The odds caught up with most tunnel rats eventually. A booby trap, a waiting VC, or just the crushing psychological weight of crawling through the earth with death always inches away. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Today, we'd struck a significant blow. The intelligence we'd gathered would save American lives. I had to believe that made it worthwhile. As we marched back to the battalion's night position, the engineers detonated their charges behind us. The ground shook as hundreds of pounds of explosives collapsed the tunnel complex we'd spent the day exploring. Months of VC work destroyed in seconds. A cheer went up from some of the newer guys in the platoon. The veterans, like me, just kept walking. Another day in the Nam, another tunnel, another brief victory in a war that seemed to have no end. That night, as I lay on my cot trying to sleep, I could still feel the tunnel around me, the closeness, the darkness, the sense of being buried alive. That feeling never really went away, not even in the open air. Once you'd been a tunnel rat, part of you remained underground forever. Tomorrow we'd move to a new area of operations. There would be more tunnels to clear, more dark passages to crawl through with nothing but a flashlight and a .45. And I would volunteer again because that's what I did. That's who I was. Staff Sergeant Mike Donovan, tunnel rat. The man who went into the darkness so others didn't have to. Staff Sergeant Michael Connors, 26 years old. 25th Infantry Division, Tropic Lightning. Born in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The darkness swallowed me whole. My breath echoed in the tight space, mixing with the earthy smell of damp soil and something else, something rotten. Sweat dripped into my eyes as I inched forward, my .45 pistol leading the way. The beam from my flashlight caught movement ahead. A flash of eyes, then nothing. My finger tensed on the trigger. Underground, in these VC tunnels, there were no rules. There was only survival. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. 3 months earlier, I'd been assigned to the 25th Infantry's tunnel rat team after my squad leader caught me, squeezing through a maintenance duct to retrieve a case of beer some genius had stashed in the air conditioning system at base. "If you like tight spaces so much, Connors, I've got just the job for you," he'd said with that sadistic smile. 2 weeks later, I was crawling through the first of what would become dozens of tunnels beneath the Cu Chi district. July 1968. The monsoon season had transformed the jungle into a steaming, dripping hellscape. Our platoon had been conducting search and destroy operations about 15 clicks northwest of Saigon when we stumbled upon what looked like a significant tunnel complex. Intelligence suspected it might connect to a major VC command center. "Connors, front and center," Lieutenant Walsh barked as we secured the perimeter around the tunnel entrance, a small, almost invisible hole beneath the roots of a banyan tree. I jogged over, already knowing what he wanted. At 5'7" and 140 pounds, I was the smallest guy in the platoon. Perfect tunnel rat material. "Sir?" I stood at attention, my uniform already soaked through with sweat and humidity. "We need eyes underground. Full complex assessment. How deep, how wide, any signs of recent activity." Walsh handed me a map. Mark anything significant. Weapons caches, communications equipment, medical supplies? I nodded, looking at the dark hole in the ground. My stomach tightened the way it always did before a tunnel mission. Take Rodriguez as your backup. Standard protocol. 15 minutes, then you signal or come out. If we don't hear from you after 20, we drop CS gas down every hole we can find. Yes, sir. I walked back to my pack and began preparing. Tunnel rats traveled light. I stripped down to my olive drab t-shirt, keeping my fatigue pants. No helmet, too bulky underground. Instead, I wore a bush hat with the brim folded up. I checked my .45 pistol, standard issue for tunnel work since the M16. Was too unwieldy in the cramped passages and slipped a K-bar knife into my boot. 2 grenades went into my pockets along with extra ammunition, a compass, and a small first aid kit. Most importantly, I secured my flashlight with fresh batteries to my wrist with duct tape. Lose your light down there, and you might as well put your pistol in your mouth and pull the trigger. Rodriguez met me by the tunnel entrance. At 5'9", he was pushing the size limit for tunnel work, but he was a solid backup, calm under pressure, and a good shot. Ready for another spelunking adventure, Mikey? He asked, checking his own .45. About as ready as I'll ever be, I replied, tightening the straps on my shoulder holster. The waiting men had formed a perimeter around the entrance, weapons pointed outward to protect us during our most vulnerable moment, entering the tunnel. 2 soldiers stood ready with ropes if we needed a quick extraction. I approached the hole, peering into the darkness. It was barely wide enough for my shoulders, typical VC design. The tunnels were specifically built to be too small for most Americans. See you on the other side, I said to Rodriguez, then lowered myself into the hole. The familiar closeness of the earth immediately pressed against me. The tunnel angled downward at about 45 degrees for the first few feet, then leveled. Out. I crawled forward on my elbows and knees, pistol in my right hand, flashlight illuminating the narrow passage ahead. The heat was suffocating. Within seconds, sweat poured down my face and back. The tunnel was only about 3 feet high and 2 feet wide, enough for me to crawl, but not much else. The walls were packed earth, reinforced in places with bamboo and scavenged wood. Clear. So far, I whispered back to Rodriguez, who followed about 5 feet behind me. Heading deeper. The tunnel took a sharp turn to the left, then another to the right, standard VC designed to limit the effects of grenades or gas. I carefully checked each turn for booby traps. The VC were masters at rigging deadly surprises for unwary tunnel rats, punji sticks, tripwires connected to grenades, even scorpions or bamboo vipers placed in small recesses. After about 50 meters, the tunnel opened into a small chamber about 5 feet high, enough to crouch in. I swept my light across the space, revealing a disturbing scene. The room contained a small table with maps spread across it, several sleeping mats, and a cache of weapons and supplies. Most concerning was an American helmet displayed prominently on a stake in the center of the room. A 25th Infantry Division helmet with a bullet hole through the front. "We've got a command post," I whispered to Rodriguez as he entered the chamber. "Behind me. Recently used. Food scraps aren't moldy yet." "Jesus," Rodriguez muttered, eyeing the helmet. "That's Henderson's. He went missing 3 weeks ago on a patrol." I felt my blood run cold but maintained focus, quickly photographing the maps with the small camera I carried. I rifled through the documents on the table, finding what appeared to be attack plans for an upcoming operation. "This is big, Rod. They're planning something for Saigon, looks like next week." Rodriguez was checking the weapons cache. Chinese, grenades, AK-47 ammunition, medical supplies. "This is a significant haul." I nodded, marking the chamber on my map. "We need to check the connecting tunnels. There could be more." The chamber had 3 exits, including the one we'd entered through. I pointed to the passage directly across from us. "That one first. Stay alert." This new tunnel was even narrower than the first, forcing me to wiggle through on my belly in places. The air grew thinner, harder to breathe. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our breathing and the occasional scurrying sound that could have been rats, or something worse. About 20 meters in, I froze. My flashlight beam had caught something ahead. A thin wire stretched across the tunnel at ankle height. "Booby trap," I whispered, barely breathing. Moving with extreme caution, I examined the wire without touching it. It ran to a Russian-made grenade wedged into the ceiling of the tunnel. If triggered, it would collapse this entire section, crushing anyone inside. "I can disarm it," I said, pulling out my wire cutters. With steady hands developed through dozens of similar situations, I carefully snipped the wire at precisely the right point, then secured the grenade. "Clear," I announced softly. Rodriguez exhaled behind me. We continued forward, finding another small chamber after about 15 more meters. This one contained a rudimentary medical station, blood-stained mats, crude surgical tools, and several bottles of antibiotics with American military markings. They were stealing our medical supplies. As I was documenting this find, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Vietnamese voices. And they were getting closer. VC. I hissed to Rodriguez, "Coming this way." We had seconds to decide. Retreat to the first chamber and potentially be trapped, or push forward and hope for another exit or hiding place. Forward, I decided. Now. We scrambled through another tunnel opening, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. This passage twisted sharply downward, taking us deeper underground. The air grew staler, and the walls pressed in even tighter. After a desperate crawl of about 30 meters, we reached another chamber. This one smaller than the others. It appeared to be a storage room for food and water. Most importantly, it had a bamboo ladder leading up to what looked like another exit. "Up," I ordered, pointing to the ladder. Rodriguez went first while I covered our backs. The voices were getting closer. I could make out at least 3 distinct speakers, moving through the tunnel system with the confidence of men on their home turf. Just as Rodriguez reached the top of the ladder, I heard a shout from the tunnel behind us. We'd been spotted. I fired 2 shots into the tunnel entrance, then scrambled up the ladder as AK-47 fire erupted below me. Bullets splintered the bamboo rungs as I climbed, one round grazing my calf with a hot flash of pain. Rodriguez had already pushed through the exit above and was reaching down to pull me up. With a final desperate lunge, I grabbed his hand and he hauled me through the opening into blinding daylight. We emerged in dense underbrush about 100 meters from our original entry point. Immediately, we could hear the firefight. Our platoon was engaged with VC forces that must have been approaching the tunnel complex from another direction. "Move!" I shouted, and we sprinted toward the sound of American M16s, zigzagging through the jungle to avoid being easy targets. We burst into a clearing where Lieutenant Walsh and the rest of the platoon had established a defensive perimeter. They were exchanging fire with an unseen enemy in the tree line. "Connors! Rodriguez! Get your asses over here!" Walsh shouted when he spotted us. We dove into position behind a fallen tree, grabbing our M16s from where we'd left them with the gear we couldn't take underground. "Sir," I gasped, catching my breath. "Major tunnel complex. Command post, weapons cache, medical station. Documents indicating an attack on Saigon planned for next week." Walsh's eyes widened. "You sure about that?" "Got it on camera," I confirmed, patting the small camera still hanging around my neck. "And sir, they had Henderson's helmet." The lieutenant's face hardened. "Bastards. We'll call in an airstrike once we extract. Blow those tunnels to hell." The firefight intensified as more VC fighters emerged from concealed positions in the jungle. They were trying to surround us. "Perimeter's breaking on the west side," someone shouted. "Connors, take your squad and reinforce that position," Walsh ordered. I gathered my 4 men and we moved quickly to the threatened section of our defensive line. The jungle foliage was being shredded by incoming fire. Through gaps in the vegetation, I could see flashes of black pajamas as the VC maneuvered through the trees. "Jackson, on your 3 o'clock," I shouted, as I spotted a fighter attempting to flank us. Private Jackson swung his M16 and fired a 3-round burst, dropping the enemy soldier. Another replaced him almost immediately. "They're pushing hard," Rodriguez observed, firing steadily at the tree line. "Must really want to protect those tunnels." I keyed my radio. "Lieutenant, they're concentrating on our position. Request. Permission to fall back to that rock formation 20 meters behind us. Better defensive position. Granted, Walsh's voice crackled back. We've got air support inbound. 5 minutes. Hold them off. I signaled my squad, and we began. A coordinated withdrawal, 2 men moving while the others provided covering fire. The VC sensed our movement and increased their pressure, several of them breaking cover to rush our position. "Grenade!" I shouted, pulling the pin and throwing it precisely into their path. The explosion sent dirt and debris skyward, temporarily, halting their advance. We reached the rocks and established a stronger position, but the VC had us effectively pinned down. Bullets ricocheted off the stones around us, showering us with fragments. Private Miller took a round to the shoulder and fell back with a cry of pain. I pulled him behind cover while Rodriguez applied a pressure bandage. "How bad?" I asked. "Through and through," Rodriguez reported. "He'll live if we get him out of here." The radio crackled. "All units, this is Walsh. Air support 60 seconds out. Marked our position with green smoke. Repeat, green smoke marks friendly positions." I pulled a green smoke grenade from my harness, yanked the pin, and tossed it into the clearing behind us. Green smoke billowed upward, marking our location for the incoming aircraft. The distinctive whop-whop-whop of Huey helicopter gunships reached our ears moments later. 2 gunships crested the tree line, their door gunners already firing into the jungle where the VC were positioned. "Keep your heads down," I ordered, as the helicopters made their first pass. The gunship's M60 machine guns ripped through the jungle canopy, supplemented by rocket fire that shredded the vegetation and anyone hiding within it. The VC fire diminished almost immediately as they scattered from the aerial assault. Lieutenant Walsh's voice came over the radio again. "All units, extraction choppers inbound. Move to the LZ in the clearing. Bring all wounded. We're blowing this place once we're clear." I helped Miller to his feet while Jackson and Rodriguez provided cover. Together, we moved back toward the main clearing where 3 Huey transport helicopters were already descending. "Move, move, move!" Walsh was shouting, directing men onto the choppers. "Priority to wounded and anyone with intel." I got Miller to the first helicopter, then handed my camera with the tunnel documentation to Walsh. "This needs to get back to intelligence ASAP, sir." Walsh nodded. "Get on that bird, Connors. You've done enough for one day." I climbed aboard next to Miller as Rodriguez and the rest of my squad piled in. The door gunner gave us a thumbs up as the helicopter lifted off, banking sharply away from the battle zone. Through the open door, I watched as the remaining troops boarded the other helicopters. Just as the last chopper lifted off, I saw a series of explosions erupt across the jungle floor. Demolition charges placed at the tunnel entrances, sealing them forever. The helicopter gained altitude, the sounds of battle fading behind us. My leg throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, but the adrenaline was still pumping too hard for me to feel much pain. Rodriguez nudged me. "So that makes what, 23 tunnels now?" 24, I corrected, wiping sweat and dirt from my face. "And hopefully my last." He laughed. "You know that's what you said after number 23, right?" I didn't respond, just stared out at the jungle passing below us. The green canopy stretched endlessly in all directions, hiding God knows how many more tunnel systems, how many more VC waiting in the darkness. The intelligence we'd gathered would save lives, possibly preventing a major attack on Saigon. But for every tunnel we found and destroyed, there were dozens more. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. They could vanish into the earth itself. As the helicopter banked toward our base at Kuchi, I closed my eyes, but the darkness behind my eyelids only reminded me of the tunnels. I could still feel the earth pressing in around me, still smell the damp soil and mildewed air. The tunnel's echoes would follow me long after this war was over. Some men feared the jungle, others the firefights. But for tunnel rats like me, the fear was more primal. The fear of being buried alive, of dying alone in the dark, in a hole half a world away from home. And yet, tomorrow or the next day, when they found another tunnel entrance, I'd gear up, check my .45 and descend once more into the darkness. Because that was the job. That was the war we were fighting, not just above ground, but below it as well. In Vietnam, even the Earth itself was enemy territory. Sergeant Michael Mouse Whelan, 24, MACV-SOG, born in Bangor, Maine. The darkness was absolute. Not the kind of darkness where your eyes eventually adjust. This was the darkness of being buried alive. My breath echoed in the narrow tunnel as sweat trickled down my spine. The click of a hammer being pulled back froze me in place. Something, was down here with me. The smothering weight of earth pressed down from all sides as I held my breath, finger tense on the trigger of my .38 Special. In that moment, trapped beneath the jungles of Vietnam, I learned that a man's greatest fear isn't death. It's dying alone in the dark. Tunnel rat? You volunteering to be a tunnel rat, Whelan? Captain Reynolds looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Yes, sir. I fit the requirements. At 5 feet 7 inches and 130 pounds, I was among the smallest men in our unit. Perfect for squeezing into the claustrophobic Q-Chi tunnels that honeycomb this part of South Vietnam. It's fucking suicide, Reynolds muttered, shaking his head. But we need someone. The VC are moving supplies through these tunnel networks faster than we can track them. Intelligence thinks there's a major hub somewhere in this sector. It was July 1968. And I'd been in country with MACV-SOG for 4 months. Studies and Observation Group. What a joke of a name. We weren't studying shit. We were a covert special operations unit running recon and direct action missions, often across borders where America officially wasn't fighting a war. Our 6-man team had been inserted 3 clicks west of Cu Chi to investigate reports of increased VC activity. Now staring at the narrow hole descending into the earth, I wondered if volunteering had been the smartest move. Comms check, Staff Sergeant Delaney said, adjusting the radio strapped to his chest. Delaney was our team leader, tough, fair, and perpetually exhausted. 5 by 5, I responded after testing my throat mic. The comms wire would trail behind me, my lifeline to the world above. The team's medic, Doc Ramirez, handed me a .38 Special revolver with a suppressor. M16 is too long for those tunnels. Take these too. He passed over a K-bar knife and 3 grenades. If you get into trouble, just fucking shoot. We'll pull you out by the wire, Delaney said, double-checking my rig. And don't be a hero. Intel is what matters. Map what you can, plant the bugs if possible, then get out. The July heat was oppressive, the humidity so thick it felt like breathing through a wet rag. My jungle fatigues were already soaked through with sweat, and I hadn't even started the real work. I stripped down to my t-shirt, tucked my pants into my boots, and wrapped a bandana around my face. The flashlight went into my mouth. The absolute last thing I wanted down there was to lose my light. 30 minutes, Delaney said. Any longer and we're pulling you out. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. The entrance to the tunnel gaped like an open mouth. Gripping the .38 in my right hand, I lowered myself into the hole. The first 10 feet were the hardest. The walls closed in immediately, barely wider than my shoulders. The smell hit me, a mixture of damp earth, mold, and something else, something human. The tunnels were active. Entering the first chamber, I whispered into my throat mic. The flashlight beam revealed a small opening about 5 feet high. These tunnels weren't built for tall American frames. They were designed for smaller Vietnamese bodies, another home field advantage. Copy, came Delaney's voice in my ear, reassuringly calm. I moved forward, mapping the tunnel in my head. First junction, right turn. Second junction, straight ahead. The radio wire trailed behind me like a thin umbilical cord. My breathing seemed impossibly loud, and every few seconds I'd stop and listen. Sometimes I swore I could hear whispers, but it was just the sound of air moving through the network of passages. 20 minutes in, I found it. The chamber was larger than the others, about 8 feet square with a ceiling high enough to stand. Wooden beams supported the dirt walls. A small table held maps and documents. Supplies were stacked against one wall. Ammunition, rice, medical supplies. Found a supply hub, I whispered. Decent-sized chamber with comms equipment, maps, and supplies. "Can you plant the bugs?" Delaney asked. Affirmative. I pulled the tiny microphones from my pocket and placed them strategically around the room. One near the table, another by what looked like a sleeping area. These would transmit VC conversations for up to 2 weeks before the batteries died. I was carefully photographing the maps when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of movement in the tunnel behind me. Not the settling of earth or scurrying of rats. Footsteps. "Someone's coming," I hissed into the mic. "At least one, maybe more." "Get out now," Delaney ordered. "Follow your wire back." But it was too late. The tunnel I'd entered through wasn't the only access point to this chamber. On the opposite wall, a canvas covering moved aside, and a VC soldier stepped through, AK-47 in hand. For one frozen moment, we stared at each other in mutual shock. I reacted first, raising the .38 and firing twice. The suppressed shots made dull thuds in the confined space. The first round hit him in the chest, the second in the neck. He crumpled without a sound. "Contact," I whispered. "One enemy down, moving out now." But as I turned to exit, the canvas moved again. I fired blindly. 3 more shots through the fabric. Someone cried out in pain, and I heard the clatter of a weapon falling. "2 down," I gasped, my heart hammering. "I'm out. 1 round left." "Move your ass, Whelan." Delaney's voice was urgent now. I grabbed the maps on the table, stuffed them into my pocket, and headed back the way I came. The tunnel seemed narrower. Now, the air thicker. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I scrambled through the passages. Left at the first junction, straight at the second. Behind me, I heard shouting in Vietnamese. They were coming. "They're behind me," I panted into the mic. "Multiple hostiles." I reached a familiar junction but hesitated. Was it right or left? In my panic, the mental map was blurring. The wire. Follow the wire. I felt along the ground, found the thin communication line and followed it. The tunnel narrowed even further, forcing me to crawl. My knees scraped against the dirt floor, elbows banging against the walls. The flashlight beam weakened, the batteries failing at the worst possible moment. A shot rang out behind me, the sound deafening in the confined space. Dirt sprayed from the tunnel wall inches from my head. I kept moving, dragging myself forward, on elbows and knees, pulling along the comms wire with desperate strength. Another shot, closer this time. They were gaining. The tunnel took a sharp turn, and suddenly the flashlight revealed the most beautiful sight. The wooden foot rungs leading up to the entrance. Daylight filtered down, impossibly bright after the darkness below. "I'm at the exit," I gasped. "Coming up hot." I scrambled up the rungs, the .38 still clutched in my shaking hand. Hands reached down, grabbed my shoulders, and hauled me roughly into the blinding sunlight. Before I could even catch my breath, the team was moving, dragging me with them. Delaney and Ramirez provided covering fire as Martinez and Cooper pulled me 20 meters away from the tunnel entrance. "Fire in the hole!" shouted Jackson, our demolitions expert. The explosion rocked the ground beneath us, sending a plume of dirt and debris skyward as the tunnel entrance collapsed. Any VC following me up would be buried alive. We didn't stop running until we reached our extraction point, half a click away. Only then, as the distinctive whoomp 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 of Huey rotors approached, did I realize I was still clutching the .38 in a death grip, with 1 round left in the cylinder. Back at base, the intelligence officers pored over the maps I'd recovered, while the rest of the team and I debriefed with Major Wilson. "The network is more extensive than we thought," I explained, pointing to the crude map I'd drawn based on my journey. "At least 3 levels in some places, with multiple exit points." "And the bugs?" Wilson asked. "Planted in the main chamber. Should be active now." Wilson nodded, satisfied. "Good work, Sergeant." Later that night, trying and failing to sleep on my cot, Delaney sat down beside me. "You did good today, Mouse." The nickname had stuck from the moment they'd selected me for tunnel rat duty. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of the VC soldier I'd killed, illuminated for a split second in my flashlight beam. First time, Delaney asked quietly. I nodded again. Won't be the last, he said, not unkindly. Not in this job. He was right, of course. 3 days later, we were back out, investigating another tunnel complex, 15 clicks north. This time, I didn't hesitate at the entrance. Something had changed inside me, hardened perhaps. Or maybe I'd just accepted that this was my role now, to crawl through the darkness, mapping the hidden war beneath the jungle floor. The second tunnel was larger but simpler in design. I planted the bugs, photographed the minimal documents I found, and was nearly back to the entrance when my flashlight caught a tripwire gleaming faintly in the beam. I froze, my breath catching. The wire was nearly invisible, strung across the tunnel at ankle height. If I'd been moving faster, I would have hit it without ever seeing it. Booby trap, I whispered into the mic. Tripwire, 10 meters from the exit. Can you disarm it? Delaney asked. I moved closer, examining the setup without touching anything. The wire led to a modified toe popper mine, simple but deadly in the confined space. Negative, I replied, going to try to go over it. Carefully, I stretched my body across the tunnel floor, arching my back to avoid touching the wire. Inch by painstaking inch, I edged forward, suspended above the tripwire by shaking arms and legs. When I finally cleared it, sweat was pouring down my face. Clear, I gasped. Coming out. That night, over warm beers in the barracks, Doc Ramirez tried to explain it to a replacement who'd just arrived in country. The VC have been building these tunnels since the war with the French, he said. Some networks are decades old. They've got hospitals down there, command centers, barracks. Hell, some of them have been living underground for years. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? The new guy asked. No one answered. We didn't have an answer. That was the whole damn problem of this war in miniature. An enemy that could appear and disappear like ghosts, striking from nowhere, then melting back into the landscape. By August, I'd completed 12 tunnel missions. Each time, I returned a little more hollow-eyed, a little more distant. The others noticed but said nothing. Every unit had its tunnel rats, and we all carried that same haunted look. The nightmares were the worst. Claustrophobic dreams where the tunnels collapsed, burying me alive, or where invisible enemies stalked me through lightless passages. I'd wake gasping for air, convinced I was still underground. My 13th mission nearly proved the superstition true. We were operating near the Cambodian border, investigating intelligence that suggested the VC were moving significant supplies through an extensive tunnel network in the area. This one's big, Delaney warned as we approached the entrance. Intelligence thinks it might connect to Cambodia. I nodded, checking my equipment one last time. The familiar ritual, 38. Special, K-bar knife, flashlight, comms wire. 30 minutes, I said. Then pull me out. The tunnel was different from the others immediately. The entrance was reinforced with timber, the passage wider and taller. This wasn't just a transit or supply route. This was infrastructure. This is sophisticated, I reported after 10 minutes. Evidence of electrical wiring in some sections, wooden flooring in parts. I'd mapped 2 levels and was investigating a descending passage when my flashlight caught something unusual. Metal, filing cabinets built into a recessed wall. Found something, I whispered. Documentation storage, looks like. I was photographing the contents of the files when my comlink went dead. Just static, then nothing. I tapped the throat mic, checked the wire. It had been cut. Ice flooded my veins. I wasn't alone down here. I extinguished my flashlight immediately, plunging myself into absolute darkness. Years later, I'd still wake up sometimes, heart racing, trapped in that moment of perfect blackness. I controlled my breathing, straining to hear. For nearly a minute, there was nothing. Then, the faintest sound of movement, someone else breathing, trying to be just as quiet as I was. In the pitch darkness, I eased the 38 from its holster, thumbing back the hammer as silently as possible. The tiny click seemed to echo like thunder. The darkness exploded with the muzzle, flash of an AK-47. The rounds tore through the space where I'd been standing seconds before. Pure instinct had saved me. I dropped to the ground at the sound of the hammer being pulled back. I fired twice toward the muzzle flash, rolled to my right, and fired again. Someone cried out in pain. I didn't wait to see if I'd killed them. Without the comms wire to guide me back, I had to rely on memory alone. I moved as quietly as possible, feeling my way through the darkness. Left at the junction, up the incline, right at the next turn. Or was it left? Panic threatened to overwhelm me. Down here, disorientation meant death. I heard voices behind me. More than one person. They were hunting me now, moving through the tunnels with the confidence of those who knew every passage by heart. I found a side chamber and pressed myself into it, trying to control my ragged breathing. Footsteps approached, flashlight beams sweeping the main tunnel. I raised the .38, prepared to sell my life dearly. 2 VC soldiers passed by my hiding place, so close I could have reached out and touched them. They were speaking rapidly in Vietnamese, their voices tense. They hadn't seen me. As their lights faded, I eased out of the chamber and continued in the opposite direction. I was gambling now, hoping this passage might lead to another exit. The tunnels were too extensive to have only one way in or out. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw it. A faint glow ahead. Not daylight, but ambient light from another chamber. I approached cautiously. It was a larger room with a bamboo ladder leading upward. An exit. But between me and freedom stood a single VC guard, his back to me as he sat, beneath a small oil lamp, eating from a bowl of rice. I had 2 options, try to slip past him or take him out. With multiple hostiles behind me, I couldn't risk him sounding an alarm. I holstered the .38 and drew my K-bar knife. The killing was quick, silent. I caught him from behind, one hand over his mouth, the other driving the blade into the base of his skull. He went limp instantly. I didn't allow myself to think about what I'd just done. There would be time for that later if I survived. I climbed the bamboo ladder and found myself emerging into the gathering dusk of a rubber plantation, nearly a kilometer from where I'd entered the tunnel system. Disoriented, I used the setting sun to establish west, then began moving cautiously through the plantation toward our planned extraction point. I had no radio, no way to contact the team. All I could do was hope they were still waiting for me. They were. After 2 hours of careful movement through enemy territory, I stumbled into our defensive perimeter, nearly getting shot by a jumpy PFC before Delaney recognized me. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, grabbing me by the shoulders. "We thought you were dead. Comms went out and we couldn't pull you by the wire." "They cut it," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. Had to find another way out. The debrief with Major Wilson was intense. The photographs I'd taken of the documents revealed major supply routes and even operational plans for upcoming offensives. Intelligence considered it a significant coup. No one asked about the VC I'd killed with the knife. No one needed to. The blood was still under my fingernails despite my best efforts to wash it away. By September, I'd completed 16 tunnel missions. Each one took something from me that I couldn't name, some essential piece of humanity that dissolved in the darkness. The rest of the team noticed the change. I'd gone from being quiet to virtually mute, speaking only when necessary. "You need a break, Mouse," Delaney told me after a particularly harrowing mission where I'd barely escaped a tunnel collapse. "I'm rotating you out of tunnel duty." I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something close to panic. "I'm the best you've got," I said. It wasn't boasting, just a statement of fact. I'd survived longer than any other tunnel rat in the C unit. "That's why I need you alive," Delaney replied. "1 month of regular operations, then we'll reassess." That night, lying awake on my cot, I realized with a kind of detached horror that I'd become more comfortable in the tunnels than above ground. The darkness made sense to me now. The crushing confinement felt normal. It was the open sky that seemed strange and threatening. When the North Vietnamese launched the autumn offensive in early October, our team was deployed near Pleiku to gather intelligence on enemy movements. We were conducting a standard reconnaissance patrol when we stumbled across a previously unknown tunnel entrance hidden beneath a destroyed village hut. Command wants it checked out, Delaney said after consulting with base. He looked at me apologetically. I know you're supposed to be off tunnel duty, but I'll do it, I said, already checking my gear. This tunnel was crude compared to the others I'd explored, hastily dug with minimal reinforcement. Probably newer, created specifically for the offensive. I was 20 minutes in when I heard it, the deep resonant rumble of B-52s dropping their payloads miles away. Down here, underground, the sound translated into vibrations that shook loose dirt from the ceiling and walls. Arc light strike nearby, I reported. Tunnels holding for now. Get out, Delaney ordered. That whole sector is being bombed. Extraction in 10 minutes. I turned back, moving as quickly as I dared through the unstable passages. I was halfway to the entrance when the world collapsed around me. Later, they told me it wasn't a direct hit, just the concussive force of a nearby strike that caused the tunnel to cave in. All I knew was the sudden roar of earth shifting, the explosive pressure against my eardrums, and then darkness more complete than anything I'd experienced before. Was buried alive. The collapse had caught me in a section where the tunnel curved. By some miracle, this bend created a pocket of safety as the rest of the passage pancaked. I was trapped in a space barely larger than a coffin. The comms wire severed, the flashlight crushed. Panic clawed at my throat. I forced it down, focusing on breathing. Slow, shallow breaths to conserve oxygen. How long before the air ran out? Hours. Minutes? I removed my t-shirt and tied it around my face as a makeshift filter against the thick dust. Then I began to dig. The work was painstaking, clearing debris with bare hands in absolute darkness. I had no idea if I was digging toward the entrance or deeper into the collapsed tunnel. All I could do was follow the path of least resistance and hope. Time lost all meaning. My world narrowed to the rhythm of dig, clear, breathe. Dig, clear, breathe. My fingers bled, nails torn away as I clawed through packed earth and splintered timber. Was this how it would end? Not shot by an unseen enemy or blown apart by a booby trap, but slowly suffocating under the weight of Vietnam itself? I thought about home. Bangor, Maine, with its harsh winters and brief, glorious summers. The small house on Cedar Street where my mother still lived. The girlfriend who'd stopped writing after my second month in country. Would anyone remember the tunnel rats? Or would we just be statistics in a war nobody understood? I don't know how long I dug. Hours, certainly. The sun air grew thinner, my movement slower. Several times I felt consciousness slipping away, only to jerk myself awake with the primal fear of dying alone in the dark. Then, through soil-packed fingers, I felt something different. Not earth or wood, but fabric. The comms wire. I'd found the path back. With renewed energy, I followed the wire, digging alongside it rather than trying to clear the entire collapse. The work was agonizing, the space so tight I could barely move my arms. But inch by inch, I made progress. When I first heard them, faint voices and the sound of digging from the other side, I thought I was hallucinating. But the sounds grew louder. They were coming for me. Here, I tried to shout, my voice a dust-choked whisper. I banged my K-bar knife against a piece of timber, again and again, a desperate Morse code. The moment Delaney's hand broke through and grabbed mine was the closest thing to resurrection I've ever experienced. They pulled me out like a birth, bloody, gasping, reborn into the harsh light of day. I spent 3 days in the field hospital, treated for dehydration, cuts, bruises, and the early stages of hypoxia. The doctors wanted to evacuate me to Japan, but I refused. My team needed me, especially now with the offensive in full swing. When I returned to the unit, something had changed in how the others looked at me. Even Delaney, who'd seen everything in his 3 tours, treated me differently, with a kind of wary respect. Command's recommended you for a Bronze Star, he told me privately. I shook my head. For what? Almost dying? For retrieving critical intelligence from 16 tunnel missions and surviving being buried alive on the 17th, he said flatly. But if you don't want it, I don't. I cut him off. Just want to finish my tour and go home. He studied me for a long moment. You're done with tunnel duty. That's an order. I nodded, feeling nothing. The tunnels had taken everything already. What more could they take? They sent me home in December 1968, 4 months before my tour was scheduled to end. The official reason was combat, fatigue, that euphemism for what happens when a man has seen too much darkness. Back in Bangor, I couldn't sleep in a bedroom. Too open, too exposed. I set up a cot in the crawl space beneath my mother's house, much to her distress. The enclosed space was the only place I felt safe. Sunlight hurt my eyes. Crowds made me panic. I jumped at backfiring cars and dropped to the ground at the sound of helicopters. Classic symptoms, the VA doctor said. He prescribed pills that didn't help, and therapy I didn't attend. The only person I could talk to was another vet who'd served as a tunnel rat with the 25th Infantry. We'd meet at a bar outside town, drink until closing, and share stories no one else could understand, about the particular quality of darkness half a mile underground, about the sound a man makes when he dies in a space too small to fall down, about the way fear tastes when you're buried alive. We're still down there, he told me once, eyes fixed, on something I couldn't see. Part of us never came back up. He was right. Decades later, long after the war ended and Vietnam became a tourist destination, I still dream of the tunnels. In the dreams, I'm always searching for an exit that doesn't exist, while behind me, unseen enemies approach in the perfect darkness. Sometimes, I wake up screaming. Other times, I wake up expecting to find myself still buried. The last 50 years, nothing but the oxygen-deprived hallucination of a dying man. But mostly, I wake up and remind myself that I made it out. Not everyone did. I survived the tunnel's echo, carried their darkness back into the light, and learned to live with what I found down there. And what found me. Sergeant Michael Mouse Whelan, 24, MACV-SOG, one of the forgotten soldiers who fought America's secret underground war. SEAL Team ambush in the Mekong madness, Navy Special Operations. Petty Officer 2nd Class Daniel Doc Harmon, 23 years old. SEAL Team 1, Detachment Delta, Columbus, Ohio. The sampan drifted silently through the mangroves, its occupants blissfully unaware of the 6 heavily armed Americans tracking their movement through waterlogged vegetation. 20 meters to my left, Chief Peterson gave the hand signal we'd been waiting for. These weren't fishermen. The weapons crates visible under their tarp confirmed our intelligence. Viet Cong supply route active and operational. Showtime, whispered Martinez beside me, his perpetual smirk evident even in the pre-dawn darkness. I chambered around in my suppressed stoner rifle, the soft metallic click sounding impossibly loud in the thick Delta air. 6 months into my tour with SEAL Team 1, and I still wasn't used to how sound carried over water. The VC had learned that lesson centuries ago. We were still catching up. Remember, Chief's voice barely carried through the mist. HQ wants prisoners this time. Martinez snorted quietly. Sure. And I want a beer that isn't hot piss. But we don't always get what we want. The sampan drifted closer. Another 30 seconds, and they'd be in the kill zone. I adjusted my position slightly, feeling swamp water seep through my tiger stripe utilities. Just another day in paradise. The Mekong Delta was its own special kind of hell. While the grunts got jungle rot in the highlands, we got immersed, in water so polluted it could probably dissolve metal. Fishermen used it as a toilet. Villages dumped waste directly into its brackish embrace. And we, the elite Navy SEALs, swam through it like demented otters. Our base camp at Nha Bay sat at the junction of several major waterways, a ramshackle collection of hooches, docks, and operations buildings from which we launched our particular brand of misery onto the unsuspecting Viet Cong. Unsuspecting was probably generous. After 3 years of SEAL operations in the Delta, they knew we were here. They just never knew where we'd hit next. Today's entertainment comes courtesy of Naval Intelligence, Chief Peterson announced during our pre-mission briefing, tapping a map of interlocking waterways that spiderwebbed through the delta. Seems our friends are moving supplies along this tributary. Weapons, ammunition, and if we're really lucky, a district-level VC commander. And if intelligence is wrong again? Martinez asked, cleaning his K-bar knife with ritualistic precision. Chief shrugged. Then we get a lovely boat ride through scenic Vietnam. Questions? There were never many questions in these briefings. After months of operations, we knew the routine. Insert by PBR patrol boat to a drop point, move to the objective, set up an ambush, create havoc, extract with prisoners if possible, and be back for the mess hall's attempt at breakfast. Our 6-man squad loaded onto the patrol boat river after sunset. These heavily armed fiberglass craft were the workhorses of the Brown Water Navy, the men who controlled Vietnam's endless waterways. Tonight, young sailors manned twin 50 caliber machine guns while we huddled in the well deck, going through final equipment checks. "You good, Doc?" asked Williams, our radio man. The nickname had nothing to do with medicine, just a play on my last name that had stuck since Bud's training. "Outstanding," I replied, checking my watch. "Always. Wanted to spend my 20s floating through sewage to kill people. Better than my job back home," Thompson chimed in. "Worked at a paper mill. Smelled worse than this." "Bullshit," we all responded in unison. It had become a squad ritual to call out Thompson's increasingly absurd claims about his previous employment. Last week he'd been an undertaker. Before that, a ballet instructor. The man had apparently held every job in America except president. The PBR's engines throttled down as we approached our insertion point, a nondescript stretch of mangrove that looked identical to every other stretch of mangrove in the entire delta. The boat commander, a lieutenant junior grade who looked young enough to be my little brother, gave Chief a thumbs up. "Happy hunting, SEALs," he offered as we slipped over the gunnel into knee-deep water. "Happy floating, Swabby," Martinez replied with mock salute. The PBR reversed away, its engines muffled for the insertion. Within seconds, it disappeared around a bend, leaving us in silence broken only by the constant insect chorus and occasional splash of something best not identified. We moved like shadows through the mangrove, our faces blackened with camo paint, our movements deliberate and practiced. The Vietnamese called us men with green faces, but tonight we were just dark shapes in a dark landscape, distinguished from the wildlife only by our firepower and questionable life choices. 2 hours of careful movement brought us to the ambush site, a narrowing of the tributary where sampans had to pass within 20 meters of the shoreline. We set up in concealed positions, each man responsible for a sector of fire, our claymore mines positioned for maximum effect. "Now we wait," Chief whispered. "Radio check every 30. Waiting was 90% of special operations, a fact they conveniently omitted from the recruitment posters. Nothing says elite warrior like sitting motionless in swamp water for hours, trying not to think about what might be swimming between your legs. Martinez took first watch while the rest of us settled into the uncomfortable routine of combat waiting. Alert, but conserving energy, weapons ready but muscles relaxed. The hours crawled by, marked only by whispered radio checks and the slow rotation of the watch. "Movement," Martinez hissed shortly before dawn. Water traffic approaching from the south. We instantly shifted to full alertness, weapons oriented toward the waterway. Through gaps in the mangrove, I could make out the shape of a sampan moving slowly upstream, pulled by a figure in the traditional conical hat. Standard camouflage for VC supply operations, appear to be innocent farmers while moving weapons that would kill Americans. Chief observed through night vision, then gave a series of hand signals confirming the target matched our intelligence profile. The plan was simple: capture if possible, kill if necessary, search the vessel for intelligence materials, then extract with any prisoners and high-value items. The sampan drifted into our kill zone. I centered my sights on the figure poling. At the rear, finger resting lightly outside the trigger guard. Chief would initiate with a whistle blast mimicking a local bird, our signal to execute the ambush. The shrill whistle split the pre-dawn air. Immediately, I thumbed my selector to semi-automatic and fired 2 controlled shots into the sampan's stern. The suppressed stoner made its distinctive coughing sound, nothing like the dramatic silencers in Hollywood movies. The figure crumpled instantly. Simultaneously, Thompson detonated a claymore, its blast throwing water and fragments across the narrow channel. Chief and Williams opened fire on the other occupants while Martinez and Jackson covered the flanks. U.S. Navy, Chief shouted in Vietnamese. Drop weapons, hands up. The surviving VC had other ideas. One raised an AK-47, getting off a wild burst before 3 separate weapons cut him down. Another dived overboard, attempting to swim for the opposite bank. Jackson tracked him with methodical precision and fired once. The water blossomed red. Clear left, I called, scanning my sector. Clear right, responded Martinez. Boat secure, confirmed Williams. The entire ambush had taken less than 15 seconds. 3 VC dead, their sampan now drifting aimlessly. Through my night vision, I could see the weapons crates had been hit during the exchange, splintered wood visible even at this distance. Doc, Martinez, secure the boat, Chief ordered. Williams, Thompson, maintain security and Jackson prep for extraction. Martinez and I slipped into the murky water, swimming silently to the drifting sampan. The smell hit me first as I pulled myself aboard. Blood, gunpowder, fish, and the peculiar sickly sweet odor of death that no training prepares you for. The 3 VC were clearly dead, their bodies assuming the awkward positions that only the recently deceased can achieve. Look at this, Martinez whispered, prying open one of the crates. Inside, nestled in straw, were brand new Chinese-made RPGs. Christmas came early. I moved to the rear of the boat, searching the bodies for documents or anything of intelligence. Phew. The VC had learned to carry minimal identification, but sometimes we got lucky. The man I'd shot wore the simple black pajamas common to both farmers and guerrillas, but his calloused hands and weathered face suggested he was actually what he appeared to be, a local impressed into service by the VC. Found something? I called softly, pulling a waterproof pouch from inside the man's shirt. Inside were papers covered in Vietnamese characters, along with crude maps. Pocket litter. Martinez nodded, using the intelligence jargon for personal items. Better than nothing. We secured the documents and continued searching, finding more weapons, some food supplies, and a small quantity of medical items. Nothing. Remarkable, but confirmation that the intelligence had been accurate. This was indeed a VC supply route. Incoming. Thompson's voice came through our radio earpieces. Multiple sampans, 1 click south and closing. Chief's response was, immediate, wrap it up. Extract with what you've got. Rendezvous at Primary EZ in 5. Martinez and I grabbed the weapons and documents, then slipped back into the water. Behind us, the sampan drifted unmanned, its dead occupants' silent testimony to another successful SEAL operation, or at least successful by the metrics of body count and captured equipment. Whether it would make any difference in a war this vast and incomprehensible remained an open question. We regrouped on the shoreline, moving quickly now that stealth was secondary to speed. Jackson had already called for extraction, the PBR, scheduled to meet us at a predetermined point half a click northeast of our position. What's the haul? Chief asked as we slogged through the shallow water. 6 RPGs, couple thousand rounds of small arms ammo, some documents, I reported. Plus 3 confirmed KIA. He nodded, apparently satisfied. Another statistic for the daily report. Another tick in the box labeled progress that somehow never seemed to bring the war any closer to conclusion. Not bad for a night's work, Thompson offered. Bet those documents reveal the entire VC command structure and end the war by Christmas. Sure, Martinez snorted. And next we'll find Ho Chi Minh's diary with all his battle plans. The dark humor was our way of processing what we'd just done. Killed 3 men whose names we'd never know, fighting for causes that seemed increasingly abstract with each passing day. The reality of special operations was far removed from the heroic narrative spun for the folks back home. We didn't win hearts and minds. We killed people and broke things, then returned to base to do it again tomorrow. We reached the extraction point just as dawn began lightening the eastern sky. The delta awakened around us, birds calling, insects buzzing, the occasional splash of fish breaking the water's surface. It could have been beautiful if we weren't carrying bloody weapons and document pouches taken from the men we'd just killed. The PBR appeared right on schedule, its distinctive engine rumble carrying across the water before the boat itself came into view. We moved into deeper water, raising our weapons clear as the patrol boat eased alongside a fallen tree that served as a natural dock. "Shopping successful?" the boat commander asked as we climbed aboard. "Got everything on the list," Chief replied, dryly. Customer service isn't what it used to be, though. The PBR's engines roared as we accelerated away from the shoreline, heading back toward Na Bay and relative safety. The adrenaline of the operation began to fade, replaced by the bone-deep fatigue that followed every mission. I slumped against the gunwale, watching the endless mangroves slip past in the strengthening light. "You hit that first guy clean," Martinez commented beside me, cleaning mud from his weapon. "2 rounds, center mass." "Thanks," I replied, feeling nothing at the compliment. My first kill had elicited powerful emotions: shock, guilt, a strange exhilaration. Now 6 months later, it registered as little more than a technical achievement, like hitting a bullseye at the firing range. Back at base, we'd debrief, clean our gear, maybe grab a few hours of sleep before the next mission. The documents would go to intelligence, the weapons to the armory for analysis. Our 3 kills would be added to the ever-growing tally that somehow never seemed to diminish the enemy's ability to fight. "Hey, Doc," Williams called from across the boat. "What are you doing after the war?" It was a common question among us, a way of reminding ourselves that this wasn't permanent, that someday we'd return to a world where people didn't try to kill us daily, and water wasn't a tactical consideration. "Opening a swimming school," I replied, deadpan. "Figured all this time in the Delta qualified me." "Bullshit," they responded in unison. And for a moment, we were just young men laughing in the early morning light, the weight of what we'd done temporarily lifted by the simple human connection of shared humor. The base appeared ahead, its ramshackle buildings and docks a strange vision of order amid the chaotic natural landscape. Another mission completed. Another day survived. In the grand strategy rooms of Saigon and Washington, our night's work would be a minor footnote. 3 enemy KIA, weapons captured, intelligence gathered. Success by the metrics available. As the PBR docked and we unloaded our lethal harvest, I caught sight of another SEAL team preparing for their own mission. Their faces showed the same focused determination we'd had 12 hours earlier, untainted by the moral complexities that would follow. They nodded to us, the universal acknowledgement between warriors, then continued their preparations. "Another day in paradise," Martinez muttered beside me. "Wouldn't want to be anywhere else," I replied, the sarcasm so habitual it almost sounded genuine. We walked toward the intelligence hooch to turn over our captured documents, 6 men covered in mud and blood and swamp water, carrying the night's work to be processed, analyzed, and fed into the insatiable machinery of war. Tomorrow we'd do it again, in another anonymous stretch of the Delta, against other anonymous men. And somewhere in the vast headquarters of Military Assistance Command Vietnam, someone would add our 3 kills to a chart and declare that progress was being made. The irony wasn't lost on any of us, but in the Delta, irony was just another thing that floated by in the muddy water, unacknowledged, but ever present. Specialist 4th Class Robert Alvarez, 27 years old, 25th Infantry Division, 2nd Battalion, 14th Infantry Regiment, Tucson, Arizona. The tunnel entrance was barely wide enough for my shoulders, a dark rectangle, cut into the red earth. It exhaled hot, stale air like the breath of something ancient and malevolent. The platoon gathered around, nobody speaking, nobody volunteering. We'd lost Jensen in a tunnel just like this one last week. Found him 2 days later with his throat cut and hands bound. The message was clear. This was their domain. We need someone small, Lieutenant Wallace said finally, his eyes scanning the group before settling on me. At 5'7" and 145 pounds, I was the obvious choice. The unspoken selection process that determined who became a tunnel rat had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with dimensions. Alvarez, he said, already knowing my answer. In Vietnam, you didn't say no to direct orders, even suicidal ones. I checked my .45 caliber pistol, the only weapon that made sense in the claustrophobic darkness below. Switched on my flashlight. Took one last look at the sky, brilliant blue, indifferent to what waited beneath. "See you on the other side," I said to nobody in particular. Then lowered myself into the earth. The first rule of tunnel clearing was simple. Control your breathing. Panic used oxygen, and oxygen was already in short supply in the tight, humid confines beneath the Vietnamese soil. I focused on slow, measured breaths as I inched forward on elbows and knees, the .45 in my right hand, flashlight in my left, both extended ahead of me like divining rods searching for death instead of water. Cu Chi District had been 25th Infantry Division territory for 2 years, yet we controlled only the surface. Below ground, an elaborate network of tunnels connected VC bunkers, supply caches, and fighting positions, a three-dimensional battlefield where American technological superiority meant nothing. Down here, it was man against man in spaces barely large enough to move. The tunnel widened slightly after the initial entrance shaft, allowing me to adopt a low crawl position. The walls were packed, earth reinforced with bamboo in critical sections, the floor smooth from countless passages. These weren't crude holes. They were engineered structures built by people who understood subterranean warfare on an almost instinctive level. My world contracted to the small circle of light ahead, the sound of my own breathing, and the constant awareness of the earth pressing in from all sides. 20 meters in, I encountered the first chamber, a small rectangular space, just large enough for 2 men to sit facing each other. Empty now, but signs of recent occupation remained. A tin cup, cigarette butts, a discarded propaganda leaflet. I keyed my radio, keeping my voice to a whisper. "Sandman 1, this is Rat. First chamber clear, continuing advance." Lieutenant Wallace's voice came back, distorted by static and earth. "Copy, Rat. Proceed with caution." Caution was a relative term when crawling through enemy tunnels. The VC had developed ingenious booby traps specifically for tunnel rats. Punji stakes positioned at bends, tripwires connected to grenades, even scorpions and snakes placed in. Containers rigged to open when disturbed. I'd seen men pulled from tunnels with bamboo spikes through their cheeks, their eyes wild with pain and the special terror that came from being trapped underground with mortal wounds. The tunnel forked ahead, presenting the first tactical decision. Left or right? No way to know what waited down either path. In the strategic briefings back at division headquarters, officers with clean uniforms pointed at maps and spoke confidently about denying the enemy their underground infrastructure. None of them had to make this choice, alone in the dark, with only a pistol and wits as protection. I chose left, using the basic reasoning that most people were right-handed and might favor the right fork for their movements. The tunnel immediately descended at a sharp angle, confirming I'd entered a new level of the complex. The air grew noticeably warmer and staler. My sweat-soaked uniform clung uncomfortably as I negotiated the descent. At the bottom of the incline, I paused to survey my surroundings. The tunnel continued straight ahead, but also had a small vertical shaft, like a chimney, rising to what I presumed was another level, or perhaps a concealed air hole. These ventilation systems were engineering marvels, small enough to avoid detection from above but sufficient to prevent asphyxiation below. 15 minutes and approximately 50 meters in, I discovered the first significant find, a small cache of medical supplies. French antibiotics, Chinese-made surgical tools, and bandages were neatly arranged on a wooden shelf built into an alcove. I photographed everything with the small camera provided for intelligence gathering, then continued forward. The tunnel began to show signs of heavier use, worn paths in the dirt floor, guide ropes along sections with poor visibility, even crude arrows scratched into the walls at intersections. I was entering the primary network rather than just an outlying section, which meant both increased danger and greater intelligence value. I keyed my radio again. Sandman 1, Rat, entering main tunnel system. Evidence of significant recent activity. Only static responded. I tried again, adjusting the frequency slightly. Nothing. Either the earth above was too thick for transmission, or I'd entered a section deliberately constructed to block radio signals. Either way, I was now completely alone, cut off from the world above. Standard. Procedure dictated immediate withdrawal if communications failed. But standard procedure was written by men who hadn't crawled 70 meters through suffocating tunnels to reach a potential intelligence goldmine. I made the decision to continue forward for another 10 minutes before reassessing. The tunnel widened into another chamber, this one substantially larger than the first, almost large enough to stand in, though I remained crouched, weapon ready. This was a proper bunker, with wooden supports, a small table, and what appeared to be a rudimentary map pinned to one wall. I immediately focused on the map, recognizing it as a diagram of American positions around Ku Chai, including several marked with red X's, presumably targets for future attacks. I carefully removed the map and placed it in my waterproof pouch, then examined the rest of the chamber. A stack of documents sat on the table, orders, supply requisitions, even what appeared to be a roster of local VC units, intelligence that could save American lives, justify the risk I'd taken. As I gathered the papers, a faint sound reached me, something between a scrape and a footstep, coming from deeper in the tunnel network. I immediately doused my flashlight, plunging myself into absolute darkness, and pressed against the wall, 45 aimed toward the sound. For 60 seconds I remained perfectly still, ears straining, pulse pounding so loudly I feared it might give away my position. The darkness was complete, the kind of blackness that exists only underground, untouched by even the faintest ambient light. In that darkness, I felt rather than saw another presence. When the flashlight beam hit my eyes, the brightness was blinding. I fired instinctively, the 45's report deafening in the confined space. The light dropped, accompanied by a grunt of pain. I rolled to the side as another shot came from the darkness, the bullet striking where I'd been seconds before. I switched my own flashlight back on, keeping it away from my body to avoid providing a target. In its beam, I saw a VC fighter clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His weapon, a Chinese pistol, lay just beyond his reach. Our eyes met across the chamber, mutual recognition of the absurd intimacy of underground combat. Two men, natural enemies by political circumstance rather than personal animosity, facing each other in a space barely large enough for both to exist. "Stop," I said in the rudimentary Vietnamese I'd learned, pointing my pistol at his chest. "Hands up." He raised his uninjured arm slowly, eyes never leaving mine. He was young, perhaps my age, with the wiry build common to VC fighters. His expression showed pain, but no fear, which worried me more than hostility would have. Men without fear made unpredictable adversaries. I gestured for him to move to the far side of the chamber, then quickly gathered the remaining documents, keeping my weapon and eyes on him throughout. Taking a prisoner complicated matters exponentially, but leaving him could mean death as soon as I turned my back. "Come," I ordered, indicating he should move ahead of me toward the tunnel entrance. He hesitated, then spoke in surprisingly good English. "More VC coming soon. You not make it out." Whether this was truth or an attempt to unnerve me was impossible to determine. Either way, my situation had become urgently time-sensitive. I needed to extract with both my intelligence findings and my prisoner before reinforcements arrived. "Move," I repeated, gesturing with the pistol. He complied slowly, clutching his wounded shoulder as he entered the tunnel ahead of me. I followed closely, flashlight illuminating his back, mind calculating distances and times. 70 meters to the entrance. Perhaps 5 minutes of movement with a wounded prisoner. Unknown time before other VC arrived. We progressed painfully slowly, the VC fighter occasionally grunting with pain as his wound scraped against the tunnel wall. I maintained constant vigilance, aware this could be an elaborate trap, leading me into an ambush or stalling until others arrived. After what seemed an eternity, but was probably less than 10 minutes, we reached the first junction where the tunnel had forked. The VC stopped, looking back at me questioningly. "Left," I directed, indicating the path back toward the entrance. He shook his head. "Not safe. Booby traps that way." I hesitated. The tactical calculation immediate and clear. If he was telling the truth, forcing him down the left passage could trigger a trap that would kill us both. If he was lying, taking the right passage could lead deeper into the complex and away from safety. In that moment, the strategic confusion that characterized the entire Vietnam conflict crystallized into a single tactical decision. Trust or distrust, left or right, life or death. "Show me," I said finally, gesturing for him to lead down the right passage. He nodded once, then proceeded slowly down the tunnel. I maintained my distance, weapon ready, senses heightened to detect any sign of deception. The passage curved gently, then began to rise. After 30 meters, I saw a faint glow ahead, natural light filtering down from above, a hidden entrance, unknown to American forces. The VC fighter stopped a few meters from the light source, turning to face me. "You let me go?" he asked simply. Another tactical decision with strategic implications. Standard procedure demanded I bring him in for interrogation. Military justice required treating him as a prisoner of war. Human decency suggested medical treatment for his wound. But I was alone, underground, in territory that could become hostile in seconds. Forcing him to the main American entrance could be a death sentence for both of us if his comrades were waiting. Using this secret exit might save my life, but required letting him go, surrendering a potential intelligence source. "Go," I said, finally. The decision made not from compassion but cold calculation. "Fast, before I change my mind." He studied my face for a moment, then disappeared up the sloped passage toward the light. I waited until he was gone, then followed cautiously, emerging from a concealed hole beneath a cluster of bamboo 300 meters from where I'd entered the earth. The tropical sun was blinding after the darkness below. I keyed my radio, relieved to hear it crackle to life. "Sandman 1, this is Rat. Do you copy?" "Rat, this is Sandman 1, came Lieutenant Wallace's voice, tension evident. "What's your status? You've been dark for 30 minutes. Emerging from secondary tunnel exit. Grid coordinates. I checked my map quickly. Whiskey Tango 5478. Have recovered significant intelligence. Request immediate rendezvous. Copy that, Rat. Stay in position. QRF is inbound to your location. I secured the area as best I could. Pistol ready. Documents protected. Eyes scanning constantly for movement. The quick reaction force arrived 15 minutes later. A squad of infantry led by a nervous-looking, "Sergeant, you the tunnel rat?" he asked, eyeing my filthy, sweat-soaked uniform. I nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted I felt now that the immediate danger had passed. "Lieutenant wants you back ASAP. Found something good down there?" "Maps, documents, supply information," I confirmed, patting my waterproof pouch. And made contact. With one VC wounded, the sergeant raised an eyebrow. "Prisoner?" I hesitated for just a moment. "Negative. Escaped during exchange." It wasn't precisely a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. Like so much in Vietnam, the reality existed, in a gray area between official reports and actual events. The documents would go to intelligence, my verbal report would enter the military record, and somewhere in the gaps between those accounts lay what had actually happened beneath the earth of Cu Chi. Back at base camp, I delivered the intelligence, materials to S2 and gave my debriefing to Lieutenant Wallace. I described the tunnel layout, the supply cache, the documents, and my exchange with the VC fighter. I omitted only the final decision to let him go, describing instead a scenario where he escaped during our emergence from the secondary exit. "Good work, Alvarez," Wallace said when I'd finished. This intelligence will help us plan the next phase of operations in the area. I nodded, wondering what next phase meant in a war where we controlled the day and they controlled the night. Where we held the sky and they held what lay beneath the earth. The strategic confusion of Vietnam, fighting an enemy we couldn't see for objectives that shifted constantly, contrasted sharply with the tactical clarity of my experience underground. Down there, the objectives had been simple: survive, gather, intelligence, return. Above ground, in the realm of strategy and policy, nothing was ever so clear. That night, cleaned and fed but still feeling the phantom constriction of the tunnel around me. I wrote in my journal words I'd never include in an official report. Went underground today. Found the enemy. He was me in different clothes. Let him go because it made sense at the time. Command says we're winning. Ground says otherwise. We'll go back down tomorrow if ordered. We'll keep following orders. What else can I do? I closed the journal and stared at the tin roof of our hooch, listening to the distant thump of artillery, illuminating targets we would never see and could never fully understand. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new tunnels, new tactical decisions within a strategic framework that seemed increasingly disconnected from the reality we experienced daily. In that moment, I understood what defined Vietnam for those of us fighting it. Perfect clarity about what needed to be done in the next 5 minutes, and absolute confusion about why we were doing it at all. Petty Officer 2nd Class Daniel Doc Harmon, 23, SEAL Team 1, Detachment Delta, Columbus, Ohio. The boat drifted silently through the mangroves, its occupants blissfully unaware of the 6 heavily armed Americans tracking their movement through waterlogged vegetation. 20 meters to my left, Chief Peterson gave the hand signal we'd been waiting for. These weren't fishermen. The weapons crates visible under their tarp confirmed our intelligence. Viet Cong supply route, active and operational. Showtime, whispered Martinez beside me, his perpetual smirk evident even in the pre-dawn darkness. I chambered a round in my suppressed stoner rifle, the soft metallic click sounding impossibly loud in the thick Delta air. 6 months into my tour with SEAL Team 1, and I still wasn't used to how sound carried over water. The VC had learned that lesson centuries ago. We were still catching up. Remember, Chief's voice barely carried through the mist. HQ wants prisoners this time. Martinez snorted quietly. Sure. And I want a beer that isn't hot piss, but we don't always get what we want. The sampan drifted closer. Another 30 seconds and they'd be in the kill zone. I adjusted my position slightly, feeling swamp. Water seeped through my tiger stripe utilities. Just another day in paradise. The Mekong Delta was its own special kind of hell. While the grunts got jungle rot in the highlands, we got immersed in water so polluted it could probably dissolve metal. Fishermen used it as a toilet. Villages dumped waste directly into its brackish embrace. And we, the elite Navy SEALs, swam through it like demented otters. Our base camp at Nha Be sat at the junction of several major waterways, a ramshackle collection of hooches, docks, and operations buildings from which we launched our particular brand of misery onto the unsuspecting. Viet Cong. Unsuspecting was probably generous. After 3 years of SEAL operations in the Delta, they knew we were here. They just never knew where we'd hit next. Today's entertainment comes courtesy of Naval Intelligence, Chief Peterson announced. During our pre-mission briefing, tapping a map of interlocking waterways that spiderwebbed through the Delta, seems our friends are moving supplies along this tributary. Weapons, ammunition, and if we're really lucky, a district-level VC commander. And if intelligence is wrong again? Martinez asked, cleaning his K-bar knife with ritualistic precision. Chief shrugged. Then we get a lovely boat ride through scenic Vietnam. Questions. There were never many questions in these briefings. After months of operations, we knew the routine. Insert by PBR patrol boat to a drop point. Move to the objective. Set up an ambush. Create havoc. Extract with prisoners if possible. And be back for the mess hall's attempt at breakfast. Our 6-man squad loaded onto the patrol boat river after sunset. These heavily armed fiberglass craft were the workhorses of the Brown Water Navy, the men who controlled Vietnam's endless waterways. Tonight, Young sailors manned twin .50 caliber machine guns while we huddled in the well deck, going through final equipment checks. "You good, Doc?" asked Williams, our radio man. The nickname had nothing to do with medicine, just a play on my last name that had stuck since Bud's training. "Outstanding," I replied, checking my watch. "Always wanted to spend my 20s. Floating through sewage to kill people. Better than my job back home," Thompson chimed in. "Worked at a paper mill. Smelled worse than this." "Bullshit," we all responded in unison. It had become a squad ritual to call out Thompson's increasingly absurd claims about his previous employment. Last week he'd been an undertaker. Before that, a ballet instructor. The man had apparently held every job in America except president. PBR's engines throttled down as we approached our insertion point, a nondescript stretch of mangrove that looked identical to every other stretch of mangrove in the entire delta. The boat commander, a lieutenant junior grade who looked young enough to be my little brother, gave Chief a thumbs up. "Happy hunting, SEALs," he offered as we slipped over the gunwale into knee-deep water. "Happy floating, Swabby," Martinez replied. With mock salute, the PBR reversed away, its engines muffled for the insertion. Within seconds, it disappeared around a bend, leaving us in silence broken only by the constant insect chorus, an occasional splash of something best not identified. We moved like shadows through the mangrove, our faces blackened with camo paint, our movements deliberate and practiced. The Vietnamese called us men with green faces, but tonight we were just dark shapes in a dark landscape, distinguished from the wildlife only by our firepower and questionable life choices. 2 hours of careful movement brought us to the ambush site, a narrowing of the tributary where sampans had to pass within 20 meters of the shoreline. We set up in concealed positions, each man responsible for a sector of fire, our claymore mines positioned for maximum effect. "Now we wait," Chief whispered. "Radio check every 30. Waiting was 90% of special operations. A fact they conveniently omitted from the recruitment posters. Nothing says elite warrior like sitting motionless in swamp water for hours, trying not to think about what might be swimming between your legs. Martinez took first watch while the rest of us settled into the uncomfortable routine of combat waiting, alert, but conserving energy, weapons ready but muscles relaxed. The hours crawled by, marked only by whispered radio checks and the slow rotation of the watch. "Movement," Martinez hissed shortly before dawn. Water traffic approaching from the south. We instantly shifted to full alertness, weapons oriented toward the waterway. Through gaps in the mangrove, I could make out the shape of a sampan moving slowly upstream, pulled by a figure in the traditional conical hat. Standard camouflage for VC supply operations. Appear to be innocent farmers while moving weapons. That would kill Americans. Chief observed through night vision, then gave a series of hand signals confirming the target matched our intelligence profile. The plan was simple: capture if possible, kill if necessary, search the vessel for intelligence materials, then extract with any prisoners and high-value items. The sampan drifted into our kill zone. I centered my sights on the figure poling, at the rear, finger resting lightly outside the trigger guard. Chief would initiate with a whistle blast mimicking a local bird, our signal to execute the ambush. The shrill whistle split the pre-dawn air. Immediately, I thumbed my selector to semi-automatic and fired 2 controlled shots into the sampan's stern. The suppressed stoner made its distinctive coughing sound, nothing like the dramatic silencers in Hollywood movies. The figure crumpled. Instantly, simultaneously, Thompson detonated a claymore, its blast throwing water and fragments across the narrow channel. Chief and Williams opened fire on the other occupants while Martinez and Jackson covered the flanks. "U.S. Navy," Chief shouted in Vietnamese. "Drop weapons, hands up!" The surviving VC had other ideas. One raised an AK-47, getting off a wild burst before 3 separate weapons cut him down. Another dived overboard, attempting to swim for the opposite bank. Jackson tracked him with methodical precision and fired once. The water blossomed red. "Clear left," I called, scanning my sector. "Clear right," responded Martinez. "Boat secure," confirmed Williams. The entire ambush had taken less than 15 seconds. 3 VC dead, their sampan now drifting aimlessly. Through my night vision, I could see the weapons crates had been hit during the exchange, splintered wood visible even at this distance. Doc, Martinez, secure the boat, Chief ordered. Williams, Thompson, maintain security. Jackson, prep for extraction. Martinez and I slipped into the murky water, swimming silently to the drifting sampan. The smell hit me first as I pulled myself aboard. Blood, gunpowder, fish, and the peculiar, sickly sweet odor of death that no training prepares you for. The 3 VC were clearly dead, their bodies assuming the awkward positions that only the recently deceased can achieve. "Look at this," Martinez whispered, prying open one of the crates. Inside, nestled in straw, were brand new Chinese-made RPGs. Christmas came early. I moved to the rear of the boat, searching the bodies for documents or anything of intelligence. Value. The VC had learned to carry minimal identification, but sometimes we got lucky. The man I'd shot wore the simple black pajamas common to both farmers and guerrillas, but his calloused hands and weathered face suggested he was actually what he appeared to be, a local impressed into service by the VC. "Found something," I called softly, pulling a waterproof pouch from inside the man's shirt. Inside were papers covered in Vietnamese characters, along with crude maps. "Pocket litter." Martinez nodded, using the intelligence jargon for personal items. "Better than nothing." We secured the documents and continued searching, finding more weapons, some food supplies, and a small quantity of medical items. Nothing remarkable, but confirmation that the intelligence had been accurate. This was indeed a VC supply route. "Incoming." Thompson's voice came through our radio earpieces. "Multiple sampans, 1 click south and closing." Chief's response was immediate. "Wrap it up. Extract with what you've got. Rendezvous at Primary EZ in 5. Martinez and I grabbed the weapons and documents, then slipped back into the water. Behind us, the sampan drifted unmanned, its dead occupants silent testimony to another successful SEAL operation, or at least successful by the metrics of body count and captured equipment. Whether it would make any difference in a war this vast and incomprehensible remained an open question. We regrouped on the shoreline, moving quickly now that stealth was secondary to speed. Jackson had already called for extraction, the PBR, scheduled to meet us at a predetermined point half a click northeast of our position. "What's the haul?" Chief asked as we slogged through the shallow water. 6 RPGs, couple thousand rounds of small arms ammo, some documents," I reported, "plus 3 confirmed KIA. He nodded, apparently satisfied. Another statistic for the daily report, another tick in the box labeled progress that somehow never seemed to bring the war any closer to conclusion. "Not bad for a night's work," Thompson offered. "Bet those documents reveal the entire VC command structure and end the war by Christmas." "Sure," Martinez snorted. "And next we'll find Ho Chi Minh's diary with all his battle plans." The dark humor was our way of processing what we'd just done. Killed 3 men whose names we'd never know, fighting for causes that seemed increasingly abstract with each passing day. The reality of special operations was far removed from the heroic narrative spun for the folks back home. We didn't win hearts and minds. We killed people and broke things, then returned to base to do it again tomorrow. We reached the extraction point just as dawn began lightening the eastern sky. The delta awakened around us, birds calling, insects buzzing, the occasional splash, a fish breaking the water's surface. It could have been beautiful if we weren't carrying bloody weapons and document pouches taken from the men we'd just killed. The PBR appeared right on schedule, its distinctive engine rumble carrying across the water before the boat itself came into view. We moved into deeper water, raising our weapons clear as the patrol boat eased alongside a fallen tree that served as a natural dock. "Shopping successful?" the boat commander asked as we climbed aboard. "Got everything on the list," Chief replied, dryly. "Customer service isn't what it used to be, though." The PBR's engines roared as we accelerated away from the shoreline, heading back toward Na Bay and relative safety. The adrenaline of the operation began to fade, replaced by the bone-deep fatigue that followed every mission. I slumped against the gunwale, watching the endless mangroves slip past in the strengthening light. "You hit that first guy clean." Martinez commented beside me, cleaning mud from his weapon. 2 rounds, center mass. Thanks, I replied, feeling nothing at the compliment. My first kill had elicited powerful emotions, shock, guilt, a strange exhilaration. Now 6 months later, it registered as little more than a technical achievement, like hitting a bullseye at the firing range. Back at base, we'd debrief, clean our gear, maybe grab a few hours of sleep before the next mission. The documents would go to intelligence, the weapons to the armory for analysis. Our 3 kills would be added to the ever-growing tally that somehow never seemed to diminish the enemy's ability to fight. "Hey, Doc," Williams called from across the boat. "What are you doing after the war?" It was a common question among us, a way of reminding ourselves that this wasn't permanent, that someday we'd return to a world where people didn't try to kill us daily, and water wasn't a tactical consideration. "Opening a swimming school," I replied, deadpan. "Figured all this time in the Delta qualified me." "Bullshit," they responded in unison, and for a moment, we were just young men laughing in the early morning light, the weight of what we'd done temporarily lifted by the simple human connection of shared humor. The base appeared ahead, its ramshackle buildings and docks a strange vision of order amid the chaotic natural landscape. Another mission completed. Another day survived. In the grand strategy rooms of Saigon and Washington, our night's work would be a minor footnote. 3 enemy KIA, weapons captured, intelligence gathered. Success by the metrics available. As the PBR docked and we unloaded our lethal harvest, I caught sight of another SEAL team preparing for their own mission. Their faces showed the same focused determination we'd had 12 hours earlier, untainted by the moral complexities that would follow. They nodded to us, the universal acknowledgement between warriors, then continued their preparations. "Another day in paradise," Martinez muttered beside me. "Wouldn't want to be anywhere else," I replied, the sarcasm so habitual it almost sounded genuine. We walked toward the intelligence hooch to turn over our captured documents. 6 men covered in mud and blood and swamp water, carrying the night's work to be processed, analyzed, and fed into the insatiable machinery of war. Tomorrow we'd do it again, in another anonymous stretch of the Delta, against other anonymous men. And somewhere in the vast headquarters of Military Assistance Command Vietnam, someone would add our 3 kills to a chart and declare that progress was being made. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. But in the Delta, irony was just another thing that floated by in the muddy water, unacknowledged, but ever present. Staff Sergeant James Whisper Callahan, 29, MACV-SOG. Born in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The rain falls like liquid mercury, each drop visible in the emerald light of my night vision. We're 5 clicks inside Laos, a place we officially never go, surrounded by an enemy that officially doesn't exist. The North Vietnamese scout steps on a tripwire 50 meters ahead. The claymore detonates with a muffled crump, shredding the jungle and the scout into a strange tableau that looks almost beautiful through the distorted lens of the starlight scope. I signal my 3-man team to hold position. We'll wait silently for the enemy reaction force, then kill them too. This is MACV-SOG's war. Invisible, deniable, surreal. 4 days earlier, I'd been lying on a cot at our forward operating base in Kontum province, trying to sleep through the oppressive midday heat. Most guys wrote letters home during downtime. Not me. There was nothing I could say to my wife that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a madman. "Callahan, gear up. Colonel wants to see you." I opened one eye to see Staff Sergeant Dawkins standing over me, already turning to leave. That was Dawkins. No pleasantries, all business. 20 minutes later, I stood in front of Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds in the makeshift command center, a sandbagged bunker filled with maps, communications equipment, and the constant drone of fans fighting the heat. "Callahan, we've got a priority mission," Reynolds said without preamble. "Intelligence suggests NVA are moving something big along the Ho Chi Minh Trail near grid coordinates Echo 37. They've pulled their regular units from the area and replaced them with elite forces. We need to know what they're protecting. I studied the map he indicated. The location was at least 10 kilometers inside Laos, a denied area, which meant if we were captured, the U.S. Malm government would disavow any knowledge of our operation. Standard SOG procedure. Team size? I asked. 4-man recon team. You'll lead. In and out in 72 hours. Observe and report only. No contact unless absolutely necessary. I nodded. Who's on the team? Your pick? I need your list in an hour. You insert at 200. The colonel turned away, conversation over. That's how it worked in SOG. No pep talks, no bullshit about serving your country. Just the mission, the timeline, and the understanding that you'd probably die doing it. I chose my team carefully. Martinez, our commo specialist who could call in an airstrike in his sleep. Tanner, a former scout sniper with eyes like a hawk. And Chen, our medic who'd saved my life twice already. All men I'd worked with before. All men who understood the unspoken rule of SOG operations. Complete the mission, no matter what. We spent the rest of the day preparing gear, studying maps, and rehearsing emergency extraction procedures. By 100, we were aboard a slick, a UH-1 Huey with no markings, headed west toward Laos. The helicopter crew wore no insignia. The aircraft itself had been sanitized of any identifying features. If we went down, there would be nothing to connect us to the United States military. We were ghosts before we even set foot in Laos. The crew chief signaled 5 minutes to the LZ. We performed final equipment checks in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. I ran my hand over the specialized kit that set SOG operators. Part: Swedish K submachine gun instead of an M16, non-standard camo uniform, indigenous rations rather than American sea rats. Everything designed to maintain deniability. 1 minute, the crew chief shouted over the rotor wash. The Huey didn't land. SOG insertions were fast rope affairs. Hover briefly, operators slide down, helicopter gone in seconds. Less exposure for the aircraft, less chance of ambush. I went first, rope burning through my gloves as I descended into the darkness of the Laosian jungle. The others followed, and within 30 seconds, the Huey was gone, leaving us in silence, broken only by the buzz of insects and the distant calls of night birds. We established a defensive perimeter, then froze, listening for any indication that our insertion had been detected. After 10 minutes of stillness, I gave the hand signal to move out. We had 15 clicks to cover before dawn, moving exclusively in darkness. The jungle at night was a different world, a hallucinatory landscape of shadows and sounds. Under night vision, everything took on an otherworldly green glow. Vines seemed to writhe like snakes. The massive trees loomed like sentinels. We moved in a standard patrol formation, maintaining 5 meters between each man, communicating solely through hand signals. Our progress was slow, methodical, each step carefully placed to avoid dry twigs or tripwires. 3 hours into our movement, Martinez froze, raising his fist, the signal to halt. I moved forward to his position, following his gaze through the undergrowth. A North Vietnamese patrol was crossing our path about 70 meters ahead, 5 men moving with the confidence of soldiers in their own backyard. We sank deeper into the shadows, becoming part of the jungle. The NVA patrol passed without incident, unaware that death had been watching them from the darkness. By dawn, we'd reached a position 2 clicks from our objective, a section of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, where intelligence suggested something unusual was happening. We established a hiding position in dense foliage overlooking a valley and settled in to rest during daylight hours. Chen took first watch while the rest of us caught what sleep we could. The jungle humidity plastered my uniform to my skin, and despite exhaustion, real sleep was impossible. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my dreams indistinguishable from the surreal reality of our mission. I woke at midday to the sound of distant trucks. Chen was already observing through a spotting scope. "Supply convoy," he whispered as I crawled up beside him. 6 trucks, heavy NVA escort. I took the scope and observed the convoy moving slowly along the dirt track below. The trucks were covered with tarps, concealing their cargo. The escort was indeed heavy, at least a platoon of NVA regulars walking alongside. "That's a lot of security for a standard resupply," Martinez commented softly. I nodded, focusing the scope on the lead truck. Through the gap in the tarp, I could see what looked like crates, ammunition perhaps, or medical supplies. Standard. War materiel. Nothing that explained the heightened security. "We'll continue observation," I decided. Something else is coming. We maintained our position through the rest of the day, documenting every movement on the trail below. Standard patrols, a few local porters carrying supplies on bicycles, nothing out of the ordinary. As darkness fell, we prepared to move closer to the trail. Our orders were to observe from a distance, but SOG operators understood that mission requirements sometimes changed in the field. We needed better intelligence. We approached to within 300 meters of the trail, establishing a new observation post with clear lines of sight. Tanner set up claymore mines facing our back trail, insurance against surprises. "Movement," Martinez whispered around 2300 hours, indicating the trail. Through my night vision, I could see a small convoy approaching, 3 vehicles with no lights, moving slowly. The lead vehicle was a BTR-50 armored personnel carrier, unusual for this area. Behind it came 2 GAZ-69 jeeps. The convoy stopped directly below our position. The rear hatch of the BTR opened, and several figures emerged. Even at this distance, it was clear they weren't standard NVA. The uniforms were different. "Russians," Tanner breathed beside me. "Those are fucking Russians." He was right. The distinctive uniforms and bearing were unmistakable. Soviet military advisors. Their presence wasn't entirely surprising. We knew the Soviets provided material support to North Vietnam, but direct involvement this far forward was unusual and potentially significant. The Russians gathered around one of the jeeps, examining what appeared to be maps. One figure stood apart, clearly in charge. Through the spotting scope, I could make out the insignia of a Soviet colonel. "Why?" "Need to document this," I whispered, pulling out the specialized camera we carried for just such occasions. Its high-speed film and enhanced lens could capture usable images, even in these conditions. I snapped several photos while Martinez quietly relayed our observations via our one-time pad encrypted message system. Our radio operator, back at base, would decode the message and pass the intelligence up the chain. The Russians spent about 20 minutes at the location before returning to their vehicles and continuing down the trail. Once they were out of sight, we held our position, processing what we'd witnessed. "Advisors that far forward, that's escalation," Chen commented. I nodded. "Command will want confirmation. We need to track them to their destination." It was a deviation from our original orders, but intelligence of this nature justified the risk. We waited another hour to ensure no additional forces were following, then began paralleling the trail, moving silently through the jungle. We tracked the convoy for another 4 kilometers before it turned off the main trail onto a narrower side. Pathways. This was unexpected. Most major facilities were situated along the main arteries of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. "Could be a forward command post," Martinez suggested. "Or an air defense installation," added Tanner. "Those Russian SAMs have been giving our birds hell lately." We approached the turnoff cautiously. The side trail showed signs of recent construction and heavy use, both indicators of something significant. I made the decision to follow the side trail at a safe distance. We moved slowly, hyper-aware of the increased risk. This close to a high-value target, security would be tighter, patrols more frequent. 2 kilometers down the side trail, Tanner held up his fist. We froze instantly, melting into the undergrowth. A moment later, I heard what he had detected, the soft crunch of footsteps on the trail ahead. An NVA patrol emerged from around a bend, moving directly toward our position. 4 men, moving in a standard security formation. They hadn't spotted us yet, but their path would take them within meters of our position. I signaled the team to prepare for contact. We couldn't allow the patrol to detect us. Not this. Close to discovering whatever the Russians were protecting. If they raised an alarm, our mission would be compromised. The patrol drew closer. I could see their faces now through my night vision. Young men, alert, but unaware of the death waiting in the darkness. I drew my knife. This would need to be silent. I gave the signal. We emerged from 4 different positions, taking down the patrol in seconds. No shots fired, just the wet sound of blades finding flesh and the brief muffled struggles of dying men. We dragged the bodies off the trail and into the dense undergrowth, covering them with vegetation. They wouldn't be discovered immediately, but we now had a clock ticking. When the patrol failed to report in, others would come looking. We need to move fast, I whispered. No more than an hour before they're missed. We continued along the trail with increased urgency. After another kilometer, the jungle opened up to reveal our objective, and the sight momentarily froze. Us in place. In a cleared area approximately 200 meters across stood a complex of temporary structures surrounding a central bunker. Floodlights illuminated a concrete pad where several large crates sat partially opened. Even from this distance, I could recognize their contents. Components for S-75 Divina, surface-to-air missile systems. Newer, more advanced, models than what we'd encountered before. More concerning were the figures moving around the site. At least a dozen Russians working alongside NVA personnel, assembling and testing equipment. This wasn't just advisory support. This was direct operational involvement. Holy shit, breathed Martinez. The Pentagon needs to see this. I nodded, already taking photos. We've got what we came for. Time to exfil. We documented the site for 10 more minutes, capturing as much detail as possible, then began our withdrawal. Our extraction point was 8 clicks away, with pickup scheduled for 400 hours. We had 3 hours to reach it. Under normal circumstances, that would have been plenty of time. But circumstances were about to become very abnormal. We'd covered less than 2 clicks when the sound of excited voices erupted behind us. The patrol we'd eliminated had been discovered sooner than expected. Within minutes, the jungle came alive with activity. Shouts, whistles, the unmistakable sound of dogs. They're tracking us, Tanner said unnecessarily. I made a quick decision. Standard evasion pattern. Martinez, call for priority extraction. New coordinates. I indicated a clearing on our map, closer than our original extraction point. Tell them we've got high-value intelligence and a Russian welcome party on our ass. Martinez nodded, already keying his radio. While he communicated with base, the rest of us prepared ambush positions. We couldn't outrun the dogs, so we'd have to slow down our pursuers. The first NVA trackers appeared 15 minutes later. 2 men with a dog on a leash, moving confidently along our trail. Behind them came the main pursuit force, spread out in the jungle. I waited until the point men were within the kill zone of our hastily prepared ambush, then triggered a claymore. The explosion shredded the trackers and their dog. Immediately, we opened fire on the main force, dropping several before they could react. The jungle erupted in gunfire as the NVA returned fire. We didn't stick around to continue the engagement. The ambush was meant only to delay, not defeat. While the enemy sought cover and assessed the situation, we were already moving rapidly away at a 90-degree angle from our original direction. Extraction confirmed, Martinez reported as we ran. Pony Express inbound to the new LZ in 45 minutes. Pony Express was our code for the special operations helicopters that supported SOG missions, UH-1s modified for increased speed and range. They'd come for us, but we had to reach the LZ alive. We employed every evasion tactic in the SOG playbook over the next half hour, crossing streams to break the scent trail, setting booby traps to slow pursuit, doubling back briefly to confuse trackers. It worked partially. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant, more confused. But as we approached the new LZ, a fresh complication arose. The clearing we'd selected for extraction was already occupied. An NVA squad apparently setting up a defensive position, perhaps, anticipating our direction of travel. Fuck, Tanner whispered as we observed them from the jungle's edge. Now what? I checked my watch. 15 minutes until extraction. No time to find an alternative. We clear it, I said simply. Fast and hard. The plan was straightforward. Chen and I would approach from the north, Tanner and Martinez, from the east. Simultaneous attack, maximum violence, complete surprise. I counted down on my fingers. 3, 2, 1. We burst from the jungle, weapons on full auto. The NVA, caught completely unprepared, went down in the first seconds. Those who survived the initial burst tried to return fire, but it was too late. Within 40 seconds, the clearing was ours. Check for survivors, I ordered as we moved among the bodies. There were none. Inbound aircraft, 2 minutes, Martinez reported, listening to his radio. We set up a perimeter and popped a purple smoke grenade to mark the LZ. The sweet-smelling smoke drifted up through the trees, creating bizarre patterns in the moonlight. The SO, sound of rotor blades reached us moments later, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of a Huey coming in fast and low. The aircraft appeared suddenly, flaring over the clearing, hovering just long enough for us to scramble aboard before surging back into the night sky. As we lifted off, the first rounds from the pursuing NVA snapped past the helicopter. The Dr. Gunner returned fire briefly. Then we were beyond range, racing westward toward the relative safety of South Vietnam. Warrant Officer James Joker Carson, 23 years old, 1st Cavalry Division, 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion, born in Oceanside, California. The Huey shuddered as a round punched through the thin metal skin near my left foot. Another pockmarked the windshield, creating a spiderweb of cracks that distorted the jungle below. Red tracers streaked past like angry fireflies as we descended into the hot LZ. "This another one of your shortcuts, Carson?" my co-pilot shouted, over the roar of the rotors and the staccato of incoming fire. "Scenic route," I yelled back, wrestling with the controls as the helicopter bucked in the turbulent air. Tourism board recommended it highly. Behind us, the door gunners hammered back with their M60s, brass casings raining onto the blood-slicked floor where 2 wounded men lay. The crew chief was applying pressure to a soldier's chest wound, his hands already crimson to the wrists. 30 seconds, I called, dropping the Huey toward a clearing barely large enough to fit us. "Welcome to the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like." Another round pinged through the cabin. "But you can never leave." Flying a helicopter in Vietnam was a lot like dating my high school girlfriend. Thrilling, dangerous, and likely to end in flames if you didn't pay constant attention. The Army had trained me to pilot the UH-1 Iroquois, the Huey, but nothing could truly prepare you for combat insertions with the 1st Cav. It was June 1967, and I was 6 months into my tour with the 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion. We were the taxi service for the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, ferrying troops into and out of the jungle, often under intense enemy fire. The division's iconic yellow and black patch with a horse's head had earned us the nickname First Team. The NVA had another name for us, Chicken Men, for the way our helicopters resembled chickens scratching at the ground when they landed. This particular morning started like most others, with a briefing that was equal parts information and misinformation. "Carson, you're taking Chalk 3 to LZ X-ray," Captain Wells said, jabbing his finger at a map of Quang Tri Province. Wells was our flight leader, an old man of 27 who'd been in country for nearly a year. "Insertion at 9, 130 hours. Intelligence says minimal resistance expected." Intelligence also said the Tet offensive would never happen, muttered Martinez, my co-pilot, and that my wife would wait for me. I smothered a laugh. Martinez had received a Dear John letter 2 weeks earlier. His wife had run off with a dentist of all people. "At least she'll have good teeth," I told him, which earned me a punch in the arm. "Cut the chatter," Wells snapped. "This is a routine insertion. 1st Platoon, Charlie Company, 2-5 Cavalry. You'll drop them, then remain on standby. For extraction. Questions?" We had plenty, but none Wells could answer. Where exactly was the enemy? How many? What was their armament? Intelligence reports in Vietnam were about as reliable as horoscopes, but with higher stakes. At 830, we began our pre-flight checks. My Huey, which I'd named Manic Pixie Dream Girl, after a particularly wild girlfriend. Back home, had taken minor shrapnel damage the previous day. The maintenance crew had patched her up overnight, but she still felt temperamental as I ran through the startup sequence. "How's she feeling?" asked Specialist Wilson, my crew chief. Wilson was from rural Georgia and treated the helicopter like a prize racehorse. He patted the side of the fuselage affectionately. "Like she's nursing a hangover," I replied, listening to the subtle imbalance in the rotors. "But she'll fly." At 900, our flight of 8 Hueys lifted off from the base at Camp Evans, forming up in a loose formation heading northwest. My door gunners, Corporal Rodriguez and PFC Thompson, manned their M60 machine guns, eyes scanning the jungle below. 10 minutes to the LZ, I announced over the intercom as we approached the landing zone, a small clearing in the dense jungle near the Laotian border. "Gunners, stay sharp." "Always do, sir," Rodriguez replied. At 19, he was the youngest of our crew, but already a veteran with over 30 combat missions. The first sign of trouble came when the lead Huey reported tracer fire from the tree line. Then the radio crackled with an update from Wells. "All chalks, be advised, LZ is hot. Repeat, LZ is hot." In the world of dark humor that defined helicopter crews in Vietnam, hot was our euphemism for being shot at by people who really, really want you dead. "Intelligence says minimal resistance expected," Martinez mimicked in a high-pitched voice. "Maybe they're just saying hello," I shot back, dropping altitude to follow the lead helicopters. You know, traditional Vietnamese welcoming committee, the chapter. Soldiers in the back, grunts from Charlie Company, didn't share our gallows humor. I could see their expressions tightening as the sound of gunfire became audible, even over the rotor wash. They checked their weapons one last time, faces set in grim determination. We came in fast and low, following the contours of the land to make harder targets. Standard procedure for a hot LZ. The lead helicopter took fire immediately. Tracers, arcing up from multiple positions around the clearing. "Taking fire from the north and west sides of the LZ," Wells reported, his voice tight but controlled. "Gunships moving to suppress." 2 Cobra attack helicopters swooped ahead of us, their miniguns chattering as they poured fire into the tree line. The distinctive sound of their 40mm grenade launchers thumped through the air as they made strafing runs over suspected enemy positions. My turn came third in the sequence. I brought Manic Pixie in hard and fast, flaring the nose up at the last moment to kill our forward speed. We hit the ground with a jolt that rattled teeth. "Go, go, go!" Wilson shouted as the troops poured out both sides of the helicopter, immediately dropping to prone positions and returning fire toward the jungle. That's when an RPG streaked from the tree line, missing us by mere feet and exploding in the clearing behind us. The concussion rocked the Huey, nearly pushing us into the trees. Shit. I wrestled with the controls, pulling in power and lifting us out of the danger zone. "Everyone okay back there?" Rodriguez took some shrapnel, Wilson reported. "Nothing serious. Right arm." "I'm good, sir," Rodriguez confirmed, though I could hear the pain in his voice. "Just a scratch." We cleared the LZ and climbed to a holding pattern to await further orders. Below us, the insertion had devolved into a full-blown firefight. The 8 Hueys had deposited about 80 men into what was clearly a prepared ambush. The radio chatter was continuous now. Reports of casualties and calls for fire support coming in rapid succession. "All chalk leaders, this is 6. The battalion commander's voice came over the radio. "We have wounded requiring immediate evacuation. Chalk 3, your designated medevac for this run. LZ coordinates to follow." "Copy that, 6, I acknowledged, exchanging glances with Martinez. Casualty evacuation was always the most dangerous mission, landing in the middle of a firefight to pull out wounded men while presenting a stationary target. "Lucky us," Martinez muttered. "Always the bridesmaids, never the bride." "Look at it this way," I replied, banking the Huey toward the new coordinates. "At least we're not down there humping rucksacks through the jungle." The new LZ was even smaller than the first, a tiny break in the canopy barely large enough for one helicopter. Below, I could see muzzle flashes and the occasional explosion as the battle continued. "This looks pleasant," I remarked, circling once to assess the situation. "Reminds me of that vacation spot in Tijuana." You know, the one with the donkey and the tequila? Martinez snorted. You promise never to mention that again. Chalk 3, this is ground 6, the radio crackled. We've got 3 urgent casualties for evacuation. LZ is still hot but partially secured. Approach from the east, minimum exposure time. Copy that, ground 6. Coming in hot. Ihar brought the Huey in at a steep angle, using the trees for cover until the last possible moment, then dropped into the tiny clearing where medics were already moving with the wounded. The door gunners opened up immediately, pouring suppressing fire into the tree line. Taking fire at 2 o'clock, Thompson shouted as green tracers zipped past his position. The wounded were loaded in record time. 3 men on stretchers, 1 with what looked like a stomach wound, another missing part of his leg, the 3rd unconscious with a head injury. A medic jumped in with them. That's it. Go, go! Wilson yelled. I pulled pitch, the Huey straining to lift with the added weight. We cleared the trees by what felt like inches, immediately banking away from the heaviest concentration of enemy fire. How are they doing back there? I called over my shoulder as we gained altitude. Not good, Wilson replied grimly. The guy with the gut wound is fading fast. I pushed the Huey to its limits, redlining the engine as we raced for the field. Hospital at Dong Ha, about 15 minutes away. Every second counted with wounds like these. Dong Ha MASH, this is Chalk 3, Martinez radioed ahead. Inbound with 3 urgent casualties, ETA 12 minutes. Copy Chalk 3. We'll be ready. The flight to the hospital was mercifully uneventful, but the tension in the cabin was palpable. Wilson and the medic worked feverishly on the wounded, starting IVs and applying pressure to bleeding wounds. I could hear them talking quietly to the conscious soldiers, the same kind of dark jokes we all used to keep the fear at bay. Hey man, you're gonna be fine. Army food ain't worth coming back for anyway. That leg? Overrated. You'll save a fortune on socks. We touched down at the hospital pad where medical teams were waiting. They whisked the wounded away with practiced efficiency, leaving behind only bloodstains on the Huey's floor. Think they'll make it? Thompson asked quietly as we lifted off again, heading back to the battle. The leg wound probably will, Wilson said, cleaning his hands with a rag. The other 2. He shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. That was Vietnam in a nutshell. Unfinished sentences, unfinished lives, unfinished war. We made 3 more medevac runs that day. By the 3rd, Manic Pixie's floor was slick with blood despite Wilson's attempts to clean between missions. My flight suit was stained dark red down the front where I'd helped load a soldier who'd lost both arms to an RPG. You know what they never show in the recruiting films? Martinez said during a brief refueling stop. All the fucking blood. John Wayne never has to fly a helicopter with his boots squelching. John Wayne never does his own stunts anyway, I replied, checking the latest bullet holes in our tail boom. Probably has a stuntman to do his bleeding for him too. By 1700, the battle had stabilized. Charlie Company had secured their objective, a suspected NVA supply route, at the cost of 6 dead and 14 wounded. We were tasked with extracting the remaining troops before nightfall. Extraction was always easier than insertion. The enemy knew exactly where you'd be landing, and they'd had all day to set up their shots. Plus, the troops were often spread out, requiring multiple touchdowns in the same area. All chalk leaders maintain minimum spacing and maximum speed. Wells instructed as we approached the LZ again. Chalk 3, you're extracting 3rd Squad from the southwest corner of the clearing. Copy that, I acknowledged, spotting the yellow smoke grenade that marked their position. The first 2 extractions went smoothly, too smoothly, triggering that 6th sense you develop after enough combat missions. I don't like this, I told Martinez as we came in for our run. It's quiet. Since when do you complain about not being shot at? He replied, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He felt it too. We touched down near the smoke and 6 soldiers broke from cover, running in a low crouch toward the helicopter. Wilson waved them in, counting as they piled aboard. That's 5, he called. 1 more. The 6th man was halfway to us when the tree line erupted with automatic fire. He went down immediately, hit multiple times. Without hesitation, Rodriguez leapt from the helicopter, sprinting to the fallen soldier as Thompson provided covering fire. "Go! Get him, Rodri!" Wilson shouted, jumping out to help. Together, they dragged the wounded man through the dirt as bullets kicked up dust around them. I held the Huey steady, fighting the urge to pull pitch and get us out of there. Every second on the ground was an eternity. Every muzzle flash from the trees, a death sentence waiting to connect. Come on," I muttered, hands white-knuckled on the controls. Rodriguez and Wilson hauled the wounded man into the helicopter, then climbed in after him. "Go!" Wilson shouted, already working on the new casualty. I didn't need to be told twice. We lifted off in a swirl of dust and spent cartridges, banking hard away from the enemy fire. "Rodriguez, you crazy son of a bitch," Martinez laughed, the relief evident in his voice. "They don't pay you enough for that kind of Hollywood shit. They don't pay me enough to sit in this helicopter with your ugly face either," Rodriguez shot back, but I could see his hands trembling as he reloaded his M60. The wounded soldier had taken 3 rounds to the chest and 1 to the leg. By some miracle, his body armor had stopped 2 of the chest shots, but the 3rd had penetrated. Wilson and one of the grunts with medical training were working to stabilize him. "He gonna make it?" I asked over my shoulder. "If we get him to Dong Ha in the next 20 minutes, maybe," Wilson replied. "Otherwise, no chance." I pushed the Huey harder, ignoring the warning lights that flickered on the instrument panel. Manic Pixie whined in protest as I asked more from her than the maintenance manual recommended, but she held together. We landed at Dong Ha just as the sun was setting, the wounded man still clinging to life as the medical team rushed him into surgery. The rest of the chalk landed shortly after, mission complete. Captain Wells found me later at the makeshift officers' club, a sandbagged bunker with a plywood bar and warm beer. "That was good flying today, Carson," he said, sitting down beside me. "Heard about Rodriguez's little adventure, too." "Any word on the grunt?" I asked, nursing my 3rd beer. "Still in surgery. 50-50 chance, they say." Wells sighed, suddenly looking far older than 27. "I'm putting Rodriguez in for a Bronze Star." "He deserves it," I agreed. "Wilson, too. Already ahead of you there." Wells ordered a whiskey, downing it in 1 swallow. "We're moving out tomorrow. New AO near the A Shao Valley." I groaned. The A Shao was notorious, a major infiltration route for NVA troops coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, heavily defended with anti-aircraft guns. "Intelligence says minimal resistance expected," I guessed. Wells actually laughed. "Intelligence says we're winning the war, Carson. You believe that one too?" I raised my beer in a mock toast. "To intelligence. May they someday meet reality. I'll drink to that." The next morning, hungover and exhausted, we prepared for another day of insertions. Manic Pixie had acquired several new patches overnight, courtesy of the maintenance crew who worked miracles with limited parts and unlimited ingenuity. "She'll hold together, sir," the crew chief assured me during pre-flight. "Probably." "That's comforting," I replied, patting the helicopter's scarred flank. "You hear that, girl? No falling apart today. Martinez arrived looking even worse than I felt." "I swear to God, if I die today, I'm going to be pissed," he muttered, climbing into the co-pilot seat. "If you die today, I'll be pissed too," I said. "The paperwork is a nightmare." Wilson and the door gunners arrived last. Rodriguez's right arm was bandaged where shrapnel had caught him the day before, but he insisted he was fit to fly. "The day I can't shoot an M60 one-handed is the day you can send me home," he declared, settling in behind his gun. As we lifted off as part of a 16-ship formation heading for the A Shao, I couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here we were, flying million-dollar machines to drop off men with rifles who would try to secure a patch of jungle that would be abandoned a week later. Then we'd pick them up, count our dead, and do it all again somewhere else. "You're unusually quiet," Martinez observed as we flew over the verdant landscape below. In the early morning light, Vietnam was achingly beautiful, all emerald hills and mist-shrouded valleys. "Just thinking about the cosmic joke that brought a surf bum from Oceanside to this particular place in the universe," I replied. "That's Deep man, he said, mimicking a stereotypical California accent. Very philosophical. Had this sociology professor in community college, I explained, always talked about the connectedness of human events, how one small decision could change everything. I enlisted because my girlfriend dumped me, and I was too pissed off to think straight. Now I'm flying over Vietnam with you ugly bastards. If it helps, I enlisted because I crashed my dad's Buick, Thompson contributed from the back. I enlisted for the babes, Wilson added. Still waiting on that particular recruitment promise to materialize. Rodriguez laughed. I enlisted because the judge said it was either the army or jail. And here we all are, I said, banking slightly to maintain formation. Riders on the storm. Getting philosophical and quoting the Doors, Martinez shook his head. You sure you didn't take shrapnel to the brain yesterday? Before I could answer, the radio crackled with Captain Wells's voice. All chalks, be advised, weather deteriorating. In the AO, prepare for limited visibility conditions. Sure enough, dark clouds were gathering ahead, promising the kind of sudden, violent thunderstorm common in this part of Vietnam during the monsoon season. Perfect, I muttered, because flying into a hot LZ wasn't exciting enough. 2 hours, and one hell of a storm later, we'd completed our mission, inserting a reinforced company into the western edge of the A Shau Valley. Miraculously, we'd encountered minimal resistance, though whether that was due to accurate intelligence or the torrential rain masking our approach was anyone's guess. As we returned to base, soaked to the skin despite the helicopter's roof, Rodriguez started singing softly. It took me a moment to recognize the tune. Riders on the Storm, by the Doors. One by one, the others joined in, even Martinez with his notoriously terrible voice. I smiled, feeling that peculiar bond that forms between men who face death together daily. We weren't heroes. We weren't special. We were just doing a job that needed doing, using dark humor and rock lyrics to keep the fear at bay. The next day, we'd do it all again. Some of us wouldn't make it back. That was the reality of Vietnam for helicopter crews, the law of averages catching up in a war measured in single days rather than grand campaigns. But for now, as we flew through the clearing storm toward the setting sun, we were alive. Manic pixie dream girl carried us home, her rotors beating a steady rhythm against the darkening sky. Riders on the storm, indeed. 3 months later, Rodriguez would be killed when an RPG hit his door gun position during an extraction near Khe Sanh. Wilson would lose his left leg to a mortar round at LZ Eagle. Thompson would serve his full tour and go home, only to die in a car accident 2 weeks after returning to the States. Martinez and I survived our tours and remained friends for decades after the war, meeting annually to drink beer and remember the men who didn't come home. We never talked about politics or the wisdom of the war itself. Those discussions were for people who hadn't been there. We talked instead about manic pixie dream girl, about Rodriguez's heroics, about the strange, terrible beauty of Vietnam seen from 1,000 feet. In our darker moments, we acknowledged what all helicopter crews knew, but seldom voiced. We were just expensive taxi drivers in a war without front lines, without clear objectives, without meaning beyond the day-to-day mission of inserting, extracting, medevassing, and surviving. But on our better days, we remembered the lives we saved, the men we brought home who would otherwise have died in the jungle. And sometimes, that was enough. In the end, that's all war stories really are. Attempts to make meaning from chaos, to find purpose in randomness, to make sense of the senseless. In Vietnam, the best you could hope for was a good crew, a reliable helicopter, and enough dark humor to get you through another day. That, and occasionally a perfect song to fly home to. Staff Sergeant James Coleman, 26 years old, MACV-SOG, born in Portland, Maine. The NVA soldier's eyes locked with mine for one impossible moment before I pulled the trigger. His expression wasn't fear or hatred, just a flash of recognition, one predator acknowledging another. My suppressed Car 15 coughed twice, and he dropped into the undergrowth, 30 meters inside Laos, in territory where Americans officially never operated. No brass to police up, no report to file, no position to mark on any official map. Just another ghost killing ghosts in a shadow war invisible to the world, watching the evening news with TV dinners in their laps. 48 hours earlier, I'd been enjoying a cold beer at our remote launch site near Kontum in the Central Highlands. SOG compounds were different from regular army bases, smaller, quieter, with an atmosphere more like a hunting lodge than a military installation. Men moved with purpose, but without the usual military formality. Beards were common, and uniform regulations were treated as optional suggestions. Results were what mattered, not appearances. Captain Reynolds found me there, nursing my beer while reviewing maps of the Vietnamese-Laotian border region. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. We've got movement along the trail. Intelligence thinks it's a North Vietnamese commander and security element. We need to interdict. The Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't a single road, but a complex network of jungle paths and staging areas that wound through Laos and Cambodia, allowing the North Vietnamese to funnel men and supplies into South Vietnam, while technically avoiding a direct confrontation with American forces. Our job in SOG was to gather intelligence on these movements and, when the opportunity presented itself, disrupt them. Officially, we didn't exist. Unofficially, we were the eyes, and sometimes the executioners in territories where conventional U.S. forces couldn't operate without triggering an international incident. How reliable is the intel? I asked. In 3 years with SOG, I'd learned that questionable intelligence got men killed. Solid enough for MACV to authorize a cross-border operation, Reynolds replied, which wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement. Airborne reconnaissance photographed movement 2 days ago, and one of our Montagnard assets reported increased activity. Yesterday, I nodded. The Montagnard tribesmen were generally reliable allies, though their report sometimes contained unintentional exaggerations. We'll insert at first light, Reynolds continued. Recon team +6 indigenous personnel. Quick in and out, 24 hours max. I spent the remainder of the evening preparing my equipment, checking my Car 15 carbine with its custom-mounted suppressor, cleaning my sidearm, a standard .45 automatic, and organizing the specialized gear we carried on cross-border. Operations. Strobe lights for emergency night extractions, specialized signaling devices, demolition materials, and maps that would be destroyed if capture seemed imminent. Our team consisted of 3 Americans, myself, Lieutenant Wilson, and our medic, Doc Harper, +6 Montagnard fighters we'd trained. The Yards, as we called them, were fierce soldiers with an intense hatred for the North Vietnamese, who had been encroaching on their ancestral highlands for generations. We gathered before dawn for a final briefing. Reynolds laid out aerial photographs showing our insertion point, the suspected movement area along the trail, and our emergency extraction zones. We have reason to believe a senior NVA officer is moving through this sector with a security detail, Reynolds explained, pointing to a section of jungle trail. Your mission is to positively identify the target and, if confirmed, eliminate him along with his escort. Barring that, gather whatever intelligence you can on troop movements and supply caches. Wilson asked about air support, always a complex question for operations inside Laos. You'll have a covey rider overhead, Reynolds answered, referring to the forward air controllers who flew small observation aircraft to coordinate potential airstrikes. He knows the mission parameters and has been cleared to call in support, if you're compromised, but keep in mind the political sensitivities. In other words, Washington would prefer we succeed quietly, or die quietly, rather than create an international incident requiring public acknowledgement of American operations. In Laos, this wasn't unusual for SOG missions. We operated with the understanding that if things went bad, we were largely on our own. We lifted off in a Huey slick just as dawn broke over the highlands. I watched the sun paint the mist-covered mountains, gold and crimson, a beauty completely at odds with the purpose of our mission. Next to me, Ramo, our Montagnard point man, methodically checked his weapon, a Swedish K submachine gun. His face betrayed no emotion, but his dark eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had been fighting this war long before Americans arrived and would likely continue fighting long after we left. The helicopter dropped us at the edge of a small clearing, 5 kilometers east of the Laotian border. We would approach the target area on foot, crossing the border clandestinely. As soon as our boots hit the ground, we moved quickly into the tree line, establishing a hasty defensive perimeter while Lieutenant Wilson confirmed our position. 6 clicks to the observation point, Wilson said quietly, tucking his map into a waterproof pouch. We move in patrol formation, 5-meter intervals, absolute noise discipline from here on. We began our trek through jungle so thick that, at times, it seemed more like swimming than walking. The heat built quickly as the morning progressed, the humidity turning the air into a steaming bath. My uniform was soaked through within the first hour, and each step required deliberate placement to avoid making noise on the leaf-strewn forest floor. SOG operations differed fundamentally from regular infantry patrols. We moved slower, more deliberately, often freezing in place for long minutes when sensing danger. Our mission wasn't to engage the enemy in force, but to observe, gather intelligence, and when necessary, strike with surgical precision before melting back into the jungle. By midday, we had crossed the invisible line that marked the Laotian border. The jungle looked no different, but we all felt the change. We were now in territory where discovery meant certain death or, worse, capture. The NVA had special plans for SOG operators they caught alive. We reached our initial observation point in the early afternoon, a ridgeline overlooking a section of the trail where intelligence suggested our target would pass. Wilson set up observation posts, placing the Montagnards in a loose security perimeter, while we prepared for a potentially long wait. Through my binoculars, I studied the section of trail below, little more than a footpath worn into the jungle floor, but a vital artery in North Vietnam's logistical network. I noted recent foot traffic, the compression of soil indicating passage within the last 24 hours. Doc Harper moved up beside me, his voice barely above a whisper. "How does it look?" "Active," I replied. "Recent movement, probably a regular unit, not just porters." Harper nodded. Like most SOG medics, he was far more than a simple healthcare provider. He could read jungle sign as well as any of us, and had a confirmed kill count higher than many infantry officers. "Ramos says there's a stream 200 meters north," Harper continued. "Good water source. And he found fresh-cut bamboo. Someone's been constructing something nearby." This was valuable intelligence. Fresh construction could indicate a new way station or storage area being established along the trail. Exactly the kind of target we were tasked with identifying and, if possible, destroying. Wilson decided to split our force. He would remain at the observation point with 3 Montagnards while I took Harper and the other 3 to investigate the construction area. We synchronized watches and agreed on emergency rendezvous points before departing. Moving with Ramo on point, we approached the reported construction site with extreme caution. The jungle had thinned slightly near the stream, increasing our visibility but also our vulnerability. We relied on stealth and the natural concealment provided by the layered vegetation. After 40 minutes of careful movement, Ramo froze, raising his fist in the universal signal to halt. He pointed ahead, where barely visible through the foliage stood a recently constructed bamboo and thatch structure, a supply cache disguised to blend with the surrounding jungle. I signaled the team to establish a security perimeter while Harper and I moved forward to investigate. The cache was unguarded, which was unusual but not unprecedented. The NVA often relied on the jungle itself as their primary security measure, knowing that few besides their own forces ventured this deep into Laotian territory. Inside the structure, we found what intelligence analysts would consider a gold mine. Crates of ammunition, medical supplies, and most importantly, a canvas satchel containing maps and documents. I quickly photographed the documents while Harper inventoried the supplies, noting types and quantities. We placed a delayed action explosive charge in the center of the cache, setting it to detonate after we were safely away. As we prepared to withdraw, the first hints of trouble came from the forest to our east. The subtle sounds of controlled movement through undergrowth, the kind made only by trained soldiers. I signaled for immediate withdrawal, and we began moving back toward the observation point, maintaining noise discipline despite our increased pace. We had covered perhaps 200 meters when the jungle erupted with automatic weapons fire. A North Vietnamese patrol had spotted our trail and was now in pursuit. Our Montagnard rear security engaged briefly, buying time for the rest of us to create distance. I radioed Wilson, alerting him to our situation. Contact east, moving toward you. 5 to 7 hostiles in pursuit. His response was immediate and calm. Copy. Setting up crossfire position at checkpoint Bravo. This was standard SOG procedure when compromised. Establish a hasty ambush at a defensible position, engage the pursuing force decisively, then break contact and exfiltrate to an emergency extraction point. We had rehearsed it countless times. We reached checkpoint Bravo, a small clearing flanked by dense vegetation, and took up positions on the far side. Harper and I anchored the center while the Montagnards secured our flanks. Less than 2 minutes later, the first NVA soldier entered the clearing, moving cautiously but pushed forward by the momentum of pursuit. That's when I saw him. An officer, judging by his uniform and the way the others deferred to him. He carried a pistol rather than a rifle and moved with the confidence of command. Could this be our primary target? Whether by coincidence or design, we had encountered what appeared to be the very force we had been sent to find. I sighted on the officer, but before I could fire, Wilson initiated the ambush from his position 30 meters to our right. The clearing exploded with gunfire as we caught the NVA patrol in a classic L-shaped ambush. 4 went down immediately, but the officer and 2 others took cover behind a fallen tree. The firefight was brief but intense. I maneuvered to get a clear shot at the officer, finally catching him as he attempted to withdraw. That was when our eyes met. That fleeting moment of mutual recognition before my rounds found their mark. He fell without a sound, and his remaining men broke contact, disappearing into the jungle. We maintained fire for several more seconds, then quickly searched the bodies, retrieving documents from the officer's person. There was no time for thorough examination. Our position was now compromised, and NVA reinforcements would surely be en route. Wilson made the call. Abort primary mission. Move to extraction point Delta. We set out immediately, moving at the fastest pace safe. Navigation would allow. The kilometers seemed to stretch endlessly as we pushed toward the emergency landing zone, crossing back into South Vietnamese territory, where air support could more freely operate. Our Covey rider was already orbiting when we reached the LZ, having been alerted by our radio call. He confirmed the area was clear for extraction and vectored in our helicopter. As the Huey descended into the small clearing, we maintained a defensive perimeter, scanning the jungle edge for pursuit. The Montagnards boarded first, followed by Harper and Wilson. I was last, backing onto the helicopter as it began to lift, still covering our withdrawal. Only when we were safely airborne did I finally lower my weapon. During the flight back to Kontum, we conducted a preliminary examination of the documents we'd recovered. They appeared to be operational orders for increased movement along that section of the trail, intelligence that would prove valuable to planners targeting the North Vietnamese logistics network. After landing, we were immediately taken to debriefing, where intelligence officers peppered us with questions about everything we had seen, heard, and found. I described the officer I had killed, and a CIA analyst confirmed he matched the description of a known NVA logistics colonel, responsible for coordinating movements along that section of the trail. Quite a coincidence, finding your target like that, Reynolds commented later as we shared a beer back at the compound. I shrugged. The jungle gives you what it gives you. That was the nature of our war. Moments of intense action separated by long stretches of waiting, planning, and moving through hostile territory. Strategic objectives often remained obscure to those of us on the ground, but our tactical missions were crystal clear. Find the enemy, gather intelligence, strike when possible, and return with whatever information we could extract from the jungle. 3 days later, intelligence derived from the documents we recovered led to a series of B-52 strikes against suspected trail concentrations. Whether these strikes significantly disrupted North Vietnamese operations was impossible for me to know from my position. Such was the compartmentalized nature of the war. Ground operators like myself rarely saw the strategic outcomes of our tactical actions. I returned to operations soon after, leading another team across another border to collect more pieces of an intelligence puzzle I would never see completed. The war in Southeast Asia sometimes seemed less about winning decisive battles and more about maintaining a steady drumbeat of pressure on an enemy who could always choose the time and place of engagement. What I did know with certainty was that my team had accomplished our mission objectives. We had identified and eliminated a high-value target, gathered actionable intelligence, and returned without casualties. In the shadowy world of SOG operations, that qualified as a success, whatever the larger strategic picture might be. As I prepared for the next mission, I found myself thinking about that brief moment of eye contact with the NVA officer, soldier to soldier, professional to professional, both caught in the same greater machinery of conflict. In that instant, perhaps, lay the only real clarity this war ever offered.